Hi and welcome to the course. Being a great leader or manager can be a demanding job. You will need to be able to communicate effectively with people at all levels in your organization. You'll need to be able to solve problems, coordinate the efforts of your team to achieve their objectives, but above all, you will need to be able to inspire people to achieve great things themselves. And that's the purpose of this course. When your team perform like superstars, you look good. Now, it's not about taking credit for their work, far from it. It's about getting them to a place where they have the time, tools and talent to deliver amazing results and want to deliver for you. Okay, so you don't have to do the whole course in one sitting. The lectures are short and it's designed so you can just do 1 or 2 lectures at a time. It's not a race to the end. On the contrary, I would suggest you allow a little time to reflect on each lecture, and you may find that there is a parallel that you can draw from your own experience. Now, I'm going to take you through the most important lessons that I have learned over the last 30 years. I will teach you the process I use to create superstar teams who will deliver for you. We'll also utilize some NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, a little bit of lean manufacturing, and finally I'll share with you some of the lessons I took from my early managers and how I incorporated those into my own style. Now, early on in the course, maybe after 2 or 3 lectures, you're going to be asked to leave a review. You don't have to do so yet. You'll be prompted another 3 or 4 times as you progress through the material, and I would suggest leaving it until a little later when you are further into the course, but it's your choice. Okay, that's enough of an intro. I really hope you enjoy the course and get a lot out of it. Okay, I'll see you in the first lecture. Interchangeable. Where I have used the names of people I know personally, I have changed them unless I state otherwise. And the tools, techniques, philosophies and methods that I present here have worked exceptionally well for me, and I sincerely hope they work equally well for you. Of course, it's entirely your decision which you choose to adopt. Okay, let's begin. Okay, and welcome back. Now, this lecture is called It's Not About You, It's About Them. You deliver through your team. That's one of the 2 things that I remember most from a management seminar I attended years ago. The sessions were led by a terribly well-spoken lady named Tatiana, who also said another thing that stuck with me to this day, but we'll come back to that in just a minute. Now, 2 things you must do to be a great leader are create a team who are capable of and motivated to delivering great results, and create an environment where that can happen. Now, people are the greatest asset of any business, and luckily for us leaders and managers, we live in a world where there are lots of people. Now, there are essentially 3 ways you can gain access to these great people. You can inherit them, you can hire them, or you can make them. We will look at how you can do this throughout this course, and we will also look at what you can do to keep them once you've got them. And that's the other thing that Tatiana said that stayed with me. People join companies, they leave managers. Now, if you take nothing else away from this course, these are the 2 things you should remember. In fact, they're so important, here they are again. You deliver through your team, and people join companies, they leave managers. Always keep those 2 things in mind. Okay, let's move on. I have to praise you like I should. Fatboy Slim. I'm going to try not to sing for the rest of the course, but I can't guarantee anything. Okay, now I'm the kind of guy who doesn't need overt praise, which is fortunate, as I've not always had managers who praise openly. Now, don't get me wrong, I am one of the fortunate few who have been lucky enough to have had far more good managers than bad, and I've learned something from all of them, the good ones and the bad. Throughout my career, and still today, because you should never stop learning, if I've seen something done particularly well, I've borrowed it, okay? I've stolen it. Semantics. Similarly, if I've seen something done in a bad way, I've made a mental note to never do that myself. Now you will find dotted throughout this course the key lessons I have learned over the past 30-something years and how I use them today in my approach. Okay, so who doesn't love to be told how great they are? Well done, great work, good job. Personally, I never get tired of hearing myself, telling myself how great I am. Right, so I'm an advocate of praise where it's due. In fact, I'd go even further than that. I'd say I'm an advocate of praise for the tiniest thing. It can be very easy for the doers, the actual people who do the work, to become demoralized. Of course, this can happen for several reasons, and not all of them may be work related. One common reason could be that they feel undervalued. And I find it staggering how often I have seen such a simple problem to solve go completely unaddressed. In my experience, this is for one or two kind of related reasons. Number one, the manager, and that's you by the way, is too preoccupied with themselves. Do I look good to my boss? Am I going to get that promotion? Am I going to get my bonus? Has something gone wrong that I could be blamed for? That they forget that the people who do the work are in fact people too, and people value being valued. Number two, some managers are thing managers rather than people managers. So let's get into that now. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. Now this lecture is called Getting to Know You, Getting to Know All About You, from The King and I. Now I didn't sing it, and I know you're thankful for that. Now probably one of the most important things that you need to know about every individual member in your team is how they like to be praised. Because people like to be praised in different ways, and this is because all of us wonderful, unique beings, humans, fall into two broad categories. In NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, people are described as having either an internal frame of reference or an external frame of reference. Those with an internal frame of reference check with their own internal barometer, their own experience, to decide if that was great work, for example. Those with an external frame of reference will check other people's reactions to gauge if that was great work. This is true not just for the "did I do a good job" question, but for all kinds of things. Some folks pull on a pair of jeans and think, yep, I look good in these, and that's an internal frame of reference. Others will pull on a pair of jeans and say, does my backside look big in these? And that's an external frame of reference. Now there will be no doubt some very clever and possibly surreptitious methods of establishing how someone may prefer to be praised. Anyone who knows me, has worked with me, or has done any of my courses will know I usually opt for the simplest solutions. So here's what I do. Drumroll, I ask. It's quite easy really. Some people love public praise and lots of fuss, and if that's the case, do that. Then they can see that what they did has been recognized by you, and now their peers will know it too, and that will serve people with an external frame of reference very well indeed. Now others may prefer that you just usher them aside and say the words, well done. And some may just need a nod or a discreet thumbs up, and that'll do the trick nicely. But the overriding takeaway here is, if one of your team does something good, acknowledge it. Find whichever method is appropriate, take the time out of your day and do it. The time you spend doing this small thing will pay back in spades. Onwards. I'll see you in the next lecture. What we've got here is failure to communicate. Cool Hand Luke. Now this is another common issue in the workplace, failure to communicate. In fact, if you asked any group of employees in any organization anywhere in the world what the number one thing that their organization could improve upon, it will be communication. Now, I don't know if that's factually true, by the way, even though I open that remark with "in fact," but it's certainly true for every organisation I've had experience in for over 30 years. So it may be true. You can decide. Now, in this context, we mean two different things by communication. How do individuals within an organisation communicate with each other, either within their own department from the bottom up or cross-functionally? And the second thing we mean is, how do the management within the organisation communicate with its employees, top down? Now, if you translate this into the individual, these can mean either no one listens to me or no one tells me anything. Okay, so in this section we're going to get into both and we'll take them in that order. But before we get on to listening, first let's understand if we're all speaking the same language. So, saying there is a failure to communicate is not strictly true. We can't help communicating. We do it all the time. We do it without even opening our mouths. The actual issue is that what we think we're saying is not always what the person on the receiving end thinks we're saying. And this cuts both ways. In NLP, yes, NLP again, there is a saying, the meaning of communication is the response you get. So take a second to consider that. The meaning of communication is the response you get. Have you ever said something to someone and their reaction was completely at odds with what you expected? That's this in action. So here's one thing that may be going on when this happens. Sometimes we live in our heads. Now, let me give you a really oversimplified scenario here. Okay, so Louise is having a bad day. Last night she had an argument with her boyfriend because he was gawping at the girls on Baywatch. Now, if you're not old enough to remember that, Google it. Now, she called him out on it. Now, she's been hitting the gym, she's been watching what she eats, and everyone can see that it's working. Everyone, it seems, except her boyfriend. Now, over breakfast the argument started again. The dog was barking because he wanted to go on his walk, not listening to an argument. Now, she leaves the house for work and the traffic is horrendous, and she finally arrives at work and she bumps into Tina, who's making her way to the coffee machine. Tina says, "Good morning, Louise, looking good today." And Louise says, "What do you mean today? Do you know how hard I've been working?" Now, that's probably not the response that Tina was expecting. Now, here's a different scenario. Louise is having a great day. She's been hitting the gym, she's been watching what she eats, and everyone can see it's working, including her boyfriend, and we all know what that means. She got up early, she walked the dog around the park, and on the way to work there was hardly any traffic. She arrived at work and bumped into Tina on her way to the coffee machine. Tina says, "Good morning, Louise, looking good today." And Louise says, "Hey, Tina, thanks for noticing, feeling good. How's your day so far?" Same greeting, totally different response. Sometimes people are not in the same place. Okay, now thankfully there are a number of ways to hit the reset button, and the simplest is another NLP/hypnosis technique called a pattern interrupt. Now, a pattern interrupt, as the name suggests, is a way to interrupt a pattern. Most of our lives we do things on autopilot, and that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's extremely efficient. We learn through our experiences the most favourable thing to do in certain situations, and when that situation comes up again, to save us having to think it all through again, we automatically choose that program and we execute it. Very elegant most of the time. Now let's have a look at another terribly simplified scenario. For the first time in my life, I have encountered a door. Now, I have no idea what it is, but I know I need to progress from this room to the next room. Ignore for a second that I know what a room is, but by some miracle I have never encountered a door before. That's another story. So, there is a small object protruding from that door, but I have no idea what it is. Now, I could get an axe. Yes, I already know what an axe is, and I could chop my way through Jack Nicholson style, and I've also seen The Shining. But that would require quite a lot of effort. Now, I could find another route to the second room, but that would take more time than I have right now. So, what to do? I reach out and I shake that small object that's protruding from the door, and it moves down and then back up again. Cool. I push it down again and I push forward and nothing happens. I push it down again and pull backwards, and hey presto, I can now get into the next room. Result. Okay. Now the next time I encounter a door, I can bypass my axe solution, I can bypass my find another route solution, and move immediately to the push down and pull method that worked so well for me the last time. Now it could be that this door opens outwards, and if that's the case, I can still bypass the first two options and try the push down and push forward method. Now if that works, I now have two things in my toolbox, a program with two branches that I can execute on autopilot when I come across another door. As I encounter more doors, I'm going to refine my program to cope with handles that turn, rotating doors, sliding doors, locked doors, even automatic doors, all of which I will be able to cope with on autopilot. Very efficient. So anyway, back to Louise and Tina. Now in the first scenario, Louise has a certain set of programs running in her head because of the events of the last 12 hours. And in the second scenario, she has a different set of programs running in her head. What we need to do in the first scenario, the one where she's in a bad mood, is interrupt that set of programs from running and bring about a reset. So how do we do that? Well, first let's have a look at how not to do that. So imagine the first scenario, and this is the conversation that has. Tina says, "Morning Louise, looking good today." And Louise says, "What do you mean today? Do you know how hard I'm working?" And Tina says, "Whoa Louise, what's wrong with you? You are always so sensitive." How do you think that would go? Right, Louise is already in argument mode. She ended last night with one, she started the day with one, and by jolly she's ready for another one right now. The dog's been barking, the traffic was bad, first a boyfriend, now Tina's joining in. Will it ever end? So, before we move on and get to a better way to interrupt a pattern, I want to draw your attention to one particular word in Tina's response there. Always. Now in linguistics, and funnily enough in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, this is described as a universal qualifier. Now there are a few of them: always, never, all, will, every. We use them all the time. All the time? Yes, we don't use them all the time because a universal qualifier precludes any other possibility. So is Louise always so sensitive? Well, probably not all of the time. And you should be careful when you use a universal qualifier, as arguments based on them are so easy to overturn. Imagine this scenario: the boss, "You're always late." The employee, "Always?" Boss, "Well, no, not always." And the employee says, "Great, then we're in agreement." See what I mean? Okay, so now what I sneakily did there was introduce a pattern interrupt. The boss in that conversation probably knows that the employee is not always late, but he's in his "he's late again and he's gonna get a roasting" mode, because he was late today, and maybe he was late yesterday and last Thursday, but the rest of the time he's pretty much there when he should be. So by opening with the "you're always late," he's already on to a loser, because his statement is based on a premise that is easily proven to be false. So the employee, being a terribly clever fellow, spotted the use of the universal qualifier and knew that, in fact, he was on time every day last week except Thursday when he fancied a lie-in. So always late was not a statement of fact. It just seemed that way to his boss. So the employee's counter of "always" immediately force the boss to recheck his understanding of the situation and concede the point that the employee was not, in fact, always late. The employee interrupted his "he's late again and he's gonna get a roasting" pattern, which is a real thing. Okay, so back to pattern interrupts. There are hundreds, and you'll probably be able to think of lots of them. Lots of them? No, just kidding. Okay, so they don't even have to be verbal. Putting your hand up in a stop sign, like early Diana Ross, could be enough to bring the person back into the room. As could the timeout signal. Now, one of the classic NLP phrases used for pattern interrupts is "can you smell popcorn?" Which would certainly get them thinking in a different way, as they would have to break out of their current thought pattern and enter their "can I smell something and is it popcorn?" pattern, which also is a thing, I think. Often a simple "shall we do that again?" will be enough to perform a reset, and from there you can move forward. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Now, for the sake of completeness, we'll quickly go over the different communication modes. Now, humans process information using their representational systems, and these are tied to our 5 senses: sight, visual; sound, auditory; kinesthetic, touch, feel; olfactory, which is smell; and gustatory, which is taste. Now, when we communicate, most people will have a preferred system from one of the first 3, which they will default to most of the time. Now, you may be wondering what this means. Well, I'll tell you. Visual learners tend to communicate visually. Auditory learners tend to communicate auditorily, if that's a word. Kinesthetic learners communicate kinesthetically. So how can you tell the difference, and how does this help? Well, let me tell you. When you communicate with someone in their preferred representational system, you are communicating with them in their language, in terms they understand. You are attuned, you're on the same wavelength, you're on the same page. You can see how that could be useful, right? So, how do you know which representational system someone operates in? Easily, as it happens, and I'll tell you, if you know what you are listening for. Now, most people will select predicates, words that give you a clue as to which representation they are operating in at any given time. Do you hear what I'm saying? See what I mean? Do you feel me? Hopefully so. It should be crystal clear. Ring a bell. Easily grasped. Okay, so visual people will use words like see, look, view, appear, show, illuminate, clear, focus. You get the picture. They tend to speak quickly. They memorize in pictures and get bored really quickly with long verbal instruction. Okay, auditory people will use words like hear, listen, sounds, tune in, tune out, resonate. They'll be all ears. Sound familiar? Okay, I'm going to try and stop doing that. They tend to speak at a normal pace. They learn best through hearing, and they pay close attention to how they sound, their tonality, their timbre, the quality of their voice. Now, kinesthetic people will use words like solid, feel, grasp, get a hold of, make contact, touch. That makes sense, right? They tend to speak slowly. They learn by doing and are quite comfortable touching others generally. So how does this help us communicate better? Well, most people, most of the time, are able to correctly interpret what is being said without too much fuss. But communicating with someone in their preferred style can make this even easier, even if you're having a difficult conversation. So if you happen to be communicating with someone who's using visual predicates, use visual predicates yourself. If you're communicating with someone who uses auditory predicates, use auditory predicates yourself. And obviously, if you're communicating with someone who uses kinesthetic predicates, use kinesthetic predicates yourself too. Now, I have a great standby phrase I always use, yes, always, when someone has said something to me that I'm not sure I understood correctly, though it will have made perfect sense to them. I say, tell me that again, but using different words. Now, not only is that a great pattern interrupt, I invented it, It usually causes people to rethink what they've said and come up with a different way of expressing it. Now, this way we can make doubly sure that we understand each other. Neat, huh? Of course, occasionally people will repeat exactly the same thing again word for word. So I just say, that was the same thing you said the first time. Or they will say the same words again but in a different order. Now this doesn't fool me. I normally borrow from the old Morecambe and Wise sketch with Andre Previn where Eric's playing Grieg's piano concerto and Andre Previn says, "You're playing all the wrong notes," and Eric says, "No, I am playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order." Okay, perhaps as important as joining someone in their representational system is matching their speaking style. Now, if someone speaks very slowly, but your natural speaking style is very quick, slow down to nearer their speed. The opposite is also true. Similarly, if the person that you're speaking to speaks softly, don't try to get your point across by being loud. Join them. Speak softly too. Now this can have massive implications. I once worked in an organization where there were two people who shared the same views on an awful lot of things, but they just did not get along. One person was softly spoken and the other person only ever spoke almost at the top of their voice. Now the quiet guy was constantly drowned out by the loud guy, and the loud guy was completely oblivious to the fact. Okay, next we're going to have a look at the lost art of listening. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back to this lecture. Right, now we're going to have a look at the lost art of listening. Now, on the surface of it, communication seems like a two-step process. There is listening and there is speaking. I think if you do it properly, it's a three-step process. There is listening, there is consideration, and then there is speaking. And that middle one is very useful and can afford you great insight. Okay, it's sad but true that just because someone is not talking, it doesn't necessarily follow that they are listening. A lot of the time when we converse with each other, we're not listening, we're just waiting for our turn to talk again. If I suspect that this is happening, I sometimes throw in a non sequitur just for my own entertainment. So a colleague says, "Yeah, I have this big meeting on Tuesday. Do you think I'll have time to prepare?" And I'll say, "My mother just adopted a giraffe with a pink petticoat." And the colleague says, "Yeah, I know. There's just so much to do." And here's another way. The cue for one person to begin speaking again is when you stop speaking. So, don't say anything. Another pattern interrupt. Now, sometimes people are not even remotely engaged in a conversation, and you can spot this easily because they will respond with stock responses from their autopilot program. Right, I know, really? Once in a meeting with my human resources lead, I got through almost all of the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody a line at a time until the penny dropped and she left and she said, "Are you doing Bohemian Rhapsody?" Anyway, a moment ago I said that this could provide you with great insight, and here's why. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use in the same proportion. Now I don't know who said that first, but a gentleman named Sid, real name, said it to me. So thank you, Sid. Second ear time. Now that's what I call this. When we communicate, we run whatever information is coming in through our own perceptual filters. We check it against our own experiences. We search our memory banks to see where it fits in. And when we allow time to consider the incoming information, I call this second ear time, you can make connections that you may not otherwise have made if you were just waiting for your turn to talk again. Now sometimes this can pave the way to easy win effective solutions if you are paying attention. Now we'll get into this a little more later when we look at how to build superstar teams, but here's a sneak peek. Over the course of a couple of days, I had the same conversation with 3 different team members, all of whom had similar roles, about what they did on a day-to-day basis. Now, June said, I raise orders up till about midday, and Kevin told me, up to lunch I do all of my order raising, and Danny told me, I get all my orders raised by 10:30. So now I know all 3 raise orders, but there is another piece of information that's very useful in there. Can you see what it is? Absolutely, the time frames. Now, during my first conversation with June, I found out that she raises orders and it takes her from about 9 a.m. when everyone starts work till about noon. So half of her day is spent raising orders. Now, as I have nothing else to compare this with, this becomes my baseline. Now later when I speak to Kevin, he tells me more or less the same thing. I check this with a baseline I got from June and it matches. All good. Now it's only when I speak to Danny that things get interesting, because she too raises orders, check, but Danny is done with this particular task by 10:30. And that's a mismatch. Now this mismatch created a question. Why is one person completing a task a full 90 minutes faster than her peers? And it's the power in that question that led to a solution to a problem that the team didn't even realize they had. Okay, we'll get into the finer process details of this a little bit later. Okay, so the skill of listening is very simple to develop. All you need to do is be present, allow time for your conversation, and use that time to consider what the other person is saying before you respond. Use your second ear time. Simple and effective. So, in summary, take the time to listen by utilizing your second ear time, and notice how differently people react when you dedicate a little quality time to actually listening to what it is they're saying. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Knowledge is power. Francis Bacon. Now, much has been written on organizational communication, but this is my very simple take on it. As a leader and a manager, unless it is sensitive, confidential, or personal, you should share it. Share information with your team. If you attend a meeting, let your team know what went on. If something good has happened in your department, publicize it. If you learn of something good that's happened in another team, spread the word. If you do this individually, make sure you tell everyone. If you do it in a team meeting and someone is not present, be sure to catch up with them. Obviously this only goes for work-related matters. If you heard that someone is having a baby, which falls under personal, let them tell people, because it's not your news to share. Now, there are 2 reasons I'm so enthusiastic about this sharing of information. First, it involves and informs everyone in the business. Remember, no one tells me anything from earlier. And secondly, because it increases the potential for stimulating new ideas dramatically. In fact, by however many fold the people in your team. Now, I probably worded that poorly. If you share the story of some progress that was made in another department with your team of 5, for argument's sake, the chances of a spin-off idea increases 5-fold. There are 5 new minds, 5 unique and individual minds, who may be able to join some dots that you haven't seen. A good idea can come from anywhere, as one CEO once said to me. Thank you, Mike. Real name. Give those ideas every chance at springing to life. Now, we'll cover my approach on ideas and how to generate them and what to do with them once you have them a little later. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Do not indulge in gossip, inside or outside of work, ever. Do not indulge in backbiting, inside or outside of work, ever. And hopefully that covers that. On the subject of sharing information, I have a couple of systems that I've set up in a number of organizations, and we'll come to them when we get to how to turn a team into a superstar team, which is next. I'll see you in the next lecture. We're gonna make you a star. David Essex. Okay. Now, do you remember earlier when I mentioned the difference between a leader and a manager? Well, here's a quick reminder. People follow leaders. They work for managers. And do you want to know the fastest way to be regarded as a leader? Do stuff for your team. That's right. You do stuff for your team. Help them solve their problems, show them things can be better, encourage and utilize their creativity, create a culture of innovation, create an environment where they can thrive, publicize their successes, value their contribution, give them credit, praise them, thank them, defend them, train them, reward them. It doesn't matter what your job title is, it's your actions that count, and that's what makes you a leader. Now, Napoleon said it much more eloquently. A leader is a dealer in hope. And next we're going to get into my model for creating superstar teams and individuals. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. The 3 T's: time, tools and talent. This is my model. This is my #1 mantra. It's easy to remember. It's easy to apply. It's a simple roadmap to creating magic consistently. It's so simple, in fact, that I'm surprised that no one else has come up with it. Anyway, no one did, so I claim dibs on the phrase, the 3 T's, time, tools and talent. It's mine, but feel free to borrow it. Okay, if you take the principles that you are going to learn here and apply them, you can all but guarantee that you will be a successful leader and manager and help create high-performing superstar individuals and teams. Now, early on in an assignment, I will always arrange a meeting with the whole team and talk them through this model and my philosophy. You see, I'm a firm believer that everyone has the potential to be amazing. And I've seen it happen repeatedly and consistently. Because if you're in the thick of it, day in, day out, push for time, working with less than perfect processes and tools with no one to show you the way through, it can be crushing. The ceiling is low and it may be getting lower under the pressure. That's what they know. That's what they experience, and that's their world. My world is different. I'll see you in the next lecture. Welcome to my world. Jim Reeves. I bet you're glad I didn't sing that. Okay, so I have a different perspective to the people at the sharp end, the ones actually doing the work. And that's because I've been here many times before, maybe not this particular organization, not with these people, but in this situation, this set of circumstances that are all too common. I have seen similar start points in many organizations, and I've also seen what can be achieved utilizing this model. And it's a world apart. What I need to do is move them from their world to mine. Now, the model is simple to understand. It's based on the belief that people are amazing, and the key ingredient to unlocking that amazingness is creativity. Now, people do creativity really well, better in fact than the most sophisticated and expensive computers in the world. People can join dots, they can see opportunities, they can take one thing, apply it to another and come up with completely new and innovative solutions. They can refine. Each individual is unique and bring their own uniqueness to the party, and that's just what we need them to do. Now, the first step is to create some space for this creativity. If you have a 37.5-hour week job and you're working 40 hours, you have no space. Step 2 is to give them the best tools available to do the job. Now this can be the physical tools, the systems, the processes, whatever it takes for them to be able to excel in their work. And the final step, talent. Take care of steps 1 and 2, and now it's all down to people. Each of us have the capacity to be creative superstars. Now for clarity, I use the word creative literally. When someone tells me they are creative, I ask them what they've created. Now 9 times out of 10 they will tell me all about their ideas. Now ideas are nice but completely useless unless you do something with them, something that brings them to life in the real world. Ideas without action are just daydreams. Sounds harsh, but it's true. Nothing you can touch in the world is an idea. It may have started out as one, but someone applied their creativity, their talent, and made it real. They created it, and after that, rinse and repeat. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Now, whenever I walk into a business and I ask any team member what prevents them from doing an absolutely outstanding job, the number one answer is always time. Without question, the most valuable commodity we have is time, so we must invest it wisely. I sounded like Yoda there. Time, valuable it is. Invest it wisely, you must. No more impressions. Okay. After the obligatory induction program, sometimes called onboarding, that most organizations will plan for you whenever you start a new job, I always schedule some time with every member of my new team, and I do this for 2 reasons. Firstly, I want to see firsthand what they do, and I want to hear it directly from them, in their own words, what their pain points are. I want to know what they like, I want to know what they dislike, what we do well, what we do poorly. I want to know everything, and make no mistake, this stuff is gold, and there's no better source of information than the guy or gal who actually does the job day in, day out. Useful for me and sometimes cathartic for them. And people love to talk, so give them the chance and they won't disappoint you. Now the second reason is that it immediately and unconsciously communicates 2 things. Firstly, I am interested, and I genuinely am. And number 2, I am someone that you can talk to. Number 1 essential quality in a leader or manager, be approachable. Now, I have 2 things in mind when I say I am someone you can talk to. First, if you have something you want to say, I will listen. Second, our relative positions within the chain of command don't matter to me. Now, I mention the latter for a very good reason. Some organizations have an institutional hierarchical nature. Now in some organizations it's probably for a good reason, such as the armed forces for example. In others it's really not. In one large organization that I worked in, one of my team told me about an issue he was having with another department. So I asked what the manager of that department had said about the matter, and he told me that he couldn't speak to that manager because he was just a band 5 and the manager in question was a band 8. As I was senior, it would be okay for me to talk to the band 8, but he couldn't, and that's how things got done. Well, actually, that's how things don't get done. Now this is bureaucratic inefficiency at its worst. The guy who knows the detail of the problem, the band 5, doesn't feel he's in a position to be able to directly solicit the help of the one person who has the authority to be able to solve it for him, which is the band 8. So how crazy is that? Now, in my simple way of thinking, if person A has a problem and person B can solve it, shouldn't you get person A and person B talking to each other at the earliest opportunity? Does it matter who has the better title? Does it matter who earns the most money? Who has the biggest office? Far more efficient, I think, just to get on with solving the problem. Now this story could actually have been even worse. As it happens, there should have been another 1 or 2 line managers between me and the band 5. So had there been a full team, the band 5 would tell his band 6 about the issue, the 6 would tell the 7, and the 7 would tell me. Then I would talk to my opposite number in the other department, who would probably have a similar thing going on at his end. Then I would tell my 7, he'd tell his 6, and eventually the answer would filter back to my 5. So can you imagine how that would look if there were any questions along the way? Complete madness. Anyway, back to scheduling some time with your new team. Preliminaries. Call a meeting with your team no more than 20 minutes. Be clear in your invite that meetings start and finish on time. Tell them you'll be spending some time with each of them in the coming days to understand what it is that they do and how you may be able to help. This establishes an us frame rather than a you and us frame. Do a quick round the table of who's who, name, how long they've been there, where they were before, and what they do in the organisation. Generally, longer serving members generally have good knowledge. Newer members may have experience they can bring from different organisations. Start with yourself and then go either left or right depending on which person made eye contact first, as they have something to say. Note if anyone has worked in any of the same industries or companies as either each other or yourself, other than the one you're in currently. If so, mention it. It establishes commonality. If not, don't worry. Okay, remind them that the meeting is only short and then ask if there are any burning issues you need to know about immediately. If not, great. They're either not comfortable telling you in public or they're not yet comfortable with you, but there are always burning issues. Okay, if there are, talk about them briefly, and if needs be, ask the person who brought it up to stay behind a few minutes to discuss it further, rather than hold everyone up. Finally, thank them for the time, tell them you're looking forward to working with them, and you should be, then close the meeting. Now, in 20 minutes, you've established several things: who you are, who they are. You are there to help. You're all one team if there are any background similarities. Meetings will start and end punctually. You want to know about anything they have concerns about. And finally, everyone is important enough for you to spend some one-on-one time with. Okay. Now, everyone knows that you will be spending some time with them, and they will be more relaxed knowing why, because there's nothing worse than getting an invite from the boss when you don't know what it is you're going to be talking about. That said, a few things could happen between now and the sit down. They could mentally rehearse exactly what they should and shouldn't say to you, or they may be coached by their immediate line manager on what they should and shouldn't say to you. Now, I have a way to bypass these scenarios and get mostly honest answers, but more on that shortly. Okay, for your one-to-one sit-down meetings there are practical considerations. If you manage a team of up to 10, you can nail this in a week. If you manage a team of 100, you'll need a different approach. If you have a team of 100 direct reports, that is, you are the line manager to 100 people, you need to consider changing the structure of the department, and we'll come to that a little later on. Okay, there are a few basic rules that you can apply here. If your team is reasonably small and everyone has distinct and separate roles, schedule time with each of them. I normally go for at least half a day per person, or perhaps a whole day depending on the complexity of what it is that they do. If the team is reasonably small and a few of the roles are similar or the same, schedule time with all of them, but perhaps just do a few targeted hours with the roles that are duplicated. And there's a reason for this, which can lead to massive efficiency gains in no time at all, which I touched on earlier and we will come back to soon. So if the team is larger and some of the team have similar or same roles, do at least half a day with one person from each discipline, and again a few targeted sessions with the others doing the same jobs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a lot of direct reports, you will need to restructure, because no one can manage dozens of direct reports and do it well. Now, I usually schedule my time top down. I will start with my managers and supervisors, and I will not stop until I have reached the lowest paid person in the department, because they're people too. And that reminds me of a story from JFK. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy visited the NASA headquarters for the first time, and he was touring the facility. He saw a janitor mopping the floor, and he went over and introduced himself. He asked the man what he did at NASA, and the janitor said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." Think about that for a second. Everyone in your team, in fact everyone in the organization, should A, understand that they are working towards a common goal and what it is, and B, all contribute to that end in some way. That is, they add value. Okay, back to time. Most people in a work environment are busy all day long, but busy doing what? And this is how I structure my sit-downs with each team member. After we've exchanged pleasantries, the first thing I ask them when I sit down is, what do you do all day? Now this sounds blunt, and deliberately so. It's not because I am blunt or that I'm being rude, it's a pattern interrupt of sorts. Do you remember when I said that people may rehearse what it is they should and shouldn't say to you, or they've been coached on what to say? This will usually bypass that. Now usually in the first few seconds after asking this, people will have a blank look, as they were not expecting such a direct question, or at least not one phrased that way. Usually they genuinely are busy, and they don't want some manager who knows nothing about their daily grind asking such an impertinent question, particularly if you're new. Now in their head they may be saying something like this: what do I do all day, you cheeky... and you can put your own expletive in there. You have no idea about the amount of things I have to get done, the impossible deadlines I have to meet, the tough targets I've been given, the number of queries I have to deal with, the system that doesn't do what I need it to do, the awkward people I have to deal with, and. Some people will actually say it out loud. Once I can see that they're about to say something like any of the above, either in their heads or out loud, I will laugh, apologise and say something like, I worded that poorly, I'm sorry. Tell me everything you do, all the good, all the bad, what works, what doesn't, anything I need to know so I can help to make your life easier. Now that rehearsed script that they may have been ready to deliver has been interrupted. Now we are just two people talking. Now you are more likely to get to what they really think, and that stuff is gold. Lap it up, because therein lie all of your immediate opportunities. Here are a few things that I always look out for. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. Being helpful, or whose job is it anyway? Now in my experience, most people want to be helpful whenever they can. It's an admirable quality, but sometimes what started as a favour became part of the day job. Now about a week into a new role, one of my seniors approached me at the end of the day and said he'd had a terrible day and he had loads to catch up on the following day. So I suggested we took 10 minutes in the morning to see if there was anything I could do to help. And when we sat down, he explained that he'd lost the whole morning to sorting out a purchase order query for accounts payable. It should have only taken about 10 minutes, but there were a bunch of complications with it, lots of back and forth between goods receiving department and the supplier, chasing PODs, proof of delivery notes, and. It was lunchtime by the time he was done. Now, I've worked my way up through the ranks, and at some point I've done most of the jobs in my field, so I can sympathise. I know how time-consuming this particular task can be. But what interested me most was one particular thing that he said. Now reread that and see if you can spot what it was. It's way up front. Sorting out a purchase order query for accounts payable. For accounts payable. Now I asked what he meant specifically by for accounts payable, and he explained that when there was an invoice query, if it's a price query it comes to our team. If it's a quantity query it should go to the goods receiving team, and as this was a quantity query I asked how he'd become involved, and he explained that it was easier if accounts just routed everything to our team and we could just sort it out for them, as we knew the contacts internally and externally, and the goods receiving team, well, they weren't really interested. So who is this easier for? Okay, so I asked him to prepare a list of all the internal contacts. There were multiple sites, so that involved different people, and a supplier list with the contact details of all the people who could provide help with proof of delivery notes, PODs. I checked the job descriptions, which were held centrally for all managers to view, of my team, the goods receiving team, and the accounts payable team. And sure enough, my team were only responsible for price queries. Okay, so I called the head of accounts payable and the head of materials management and arranged a meeting for that afternoon. I took the job descriptions with me, though it turned out I didn't need them, and talked the matter through with them. Though it wasn't a happy conversation, we agreed that the accounts team would pick up the sortation as all the invoices came to them first, and it was also in their job description, and direct the queries to the appropriate department. Now, we agreed that the goods receiving team would take responsibility for any quantity queries. It was in their job description after all. I furnished both with a paper copy of the list of supplier contacts and accounts with a list of the goods receiving department contacts, and asked my senior to email a copy of each internally. I confirmed the details of our meeting by email to both heads of department and asked that they communicated the agreed process to their respective teams. Now, as it turned out, several members of the team experienced time pressures brought on by being helpful, and if time is tight, help with the things that you should be helping with. Do your own job first, and then if you have spare time, help with the things you could help with. Don't do it to the point where the people whose job it really is abdicate their responsibility to you. It's critical to understand which activities naturally and correctly sit within your team, because they're the things they're paid to do. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome to your first exercise from the 3Ts model. Part 1, time. Exercise 1, being helpful. Now, in the last lecture, we had a look at where someone was helpful and it was eating a boatload of their time. So what I would suggest you do is take the time to sit with the individual members of your team to understand what they do. Find out if there is anything that they are doing that doesn't naturally sit within their job description. If you're in doubt, ask. If you find any such activity, engage with the relevant line manager for the department where that task actually sits and arrange a handover. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. If you want it doing properly. Okay, and welcome back. Now, this one is kind of related to the first, but it highlights another thing that I always watch out for. In a different organization, one of my team had multiple piles of A4 printouts on her desk. I think they call that letter size in the USA. And during the course of the day, between phone calls and other routine tasks, she was checking through them, assembling different combinations, stapling them together, then adding each to other different piles. By mid-afternoon, she had 4 piles of perfectly assembled documents, each with a post-it note on top. Interesting. I had to ask, what's that then? She told me that for one of the highly specialized product ranges that we sold, each of the specific lines required a specific pack accompanying each order. Okay, why are you doing that? I asked her. She said that she wasn't actually doing it. She was checking and correcting the packs that the sales support team responsible for that range had done. Now, to make sure that the right combination of documents accompanied the right products. Okay, that done, she returned the checked work to the team and the process moved on. Now, before this process was introduced, the company had suffered a string of customer complaints for incorrect documentation. So, we were in agreement that upsetting your customer is not a desirable thing to do. Check. We also agreed that the existing process was failing. Check. What we didn't agree on was the solution, or the home of that solution. Now, I spent a lot of time in completely different industries, one of which was automotive. Now there, I was fortunate enough to work with some of the sharpest minds I have ever known. In particular, a guy named Alex, real name, who was an expert in the field of lean manufacturing, and he set me on a path of discovery that became part of my life as well as my career. Now, don't be thrown by the word manufacturing in the title, as lean principles can be used in other industries outside of manufacturing and indeed in life in general. Now, I may develop a course on lean, but for now the lesson here relates to muda. Muda is the Japanese word for waste. In lean manufacturing terminology, specifically the 7 deadly wastes, or mudas. And here they are: waiting, overproduction, rejects, motion, processing, inventory, transport. Now you'll notice that these conveniently spell out the mnemonic worm pit, and we'll touch on a few of these as we go through the course, but the one we're interested in here is rejects. Now, when you manufacture a product, the cost of manufacture is made up of the cost of materials and the cost of the production, including all the other support costs. So if you sell a part for $3 and it contains $1 worth of raw materials and it costs $1 to produce, labor, machine time, packaging, distribution, marketing, everything else, you will make $1 in profit. Cool. But if you don't get that right the first time, your $1 profit erodes. Outright rejects lead to 150% loss. For each part you make, you spend your $1 on materials and your $1 on all the other associated costs, and you should get $1 in profit. If you end up scrapping it, you throw all 3 of those dollars in the bin. Not cool. If, after manufacture, you need to check your work, there is an associated cost with that, which in this case was the cost of the time of one of my team. So, even if it turns out to be okay, that extra cost still exists because the production process, the work of the sales support team, was so unreliable that a 100% inspection needed to be carried out. If we found something wrong, we then had to correct the mistake, which obviously costs more time and possibly more in materials if we had to scrap some part of the item and replace it with the correct part. You can see how this is wasteful, right? Now on top of this, we also added another waste twice: transport. The packs were produced in a different building. So in the morning, someone would walk from one building to the other to bring the work to be checked. And mid-afternoon, someone would transport it back. Now the challenge was to eliminate those 2 mudas, those 2 wastes, and there were 2 questions. How was it that when we checked the work, we knew how to get it right? And the second question was, how was it that the original production team, the sales support team, didn't? I just know through experience it's really easy if you know what you're doing, was the answer. Now that's an answer, but that's not a great answer, and here's why. If you rely on expertise that resides in one person, you are wholly reliant on that one person. What happens if they're on holiday or leave the business? The world stops. You're in trouble. So I asked if it would be possible for her to describe her process, her experience, her methodology, and create a set of instructions using a set of rules that could be applied on a single side of paper. The idea being that someone with 0 experience, me in the first instance, could pick it up and do it correctly. And she said yes. She did it, and we tested it on me and with a couple of other folks in the office. Mission 1 accomplished. The how. Next came the who. Now, she arranged a meeting with the sales team and scheduled a 15-minute training session where she would take them through her process using the easy-to-follow instructions she had created. She agreed she would continue to check the work for the first couple of batches to ensure that her instructions were clear and that the output was correct, good units coming off the line. And that was that. Though it didn't eat a huge block of her time, it ate a lot of little bites, and now she had that time back. Sure, an investment of a few hours were required, but the payback period was short, and I'll elaborate on that last part as it's very important. Now, a lot of the time things don't get changed because the perceived time to improve a situation or the amount of work perceived to change that situation is just too great. But here it's important that we always do the math and then conclude whether the return on investment is worth it. And it's generally pretty simple to do. If you lose 5 minutes a day to a particular task and with 20 hours of dedicated hard work you could eliminate it, would you do it? Well, probably not. At 5 minutes a day it would take you 12 working days to get even 1 hour back. 20 hours, that's 240 days. Bad return on investment. But if you spent half an hour a day on something and 5 hours of work would eliminate it, would you do it then? Well, of course you would. That you would be no better off for the first couple of weeks, but after that it's all cream. Anyway, let's take a look at another one. Okay guys, and welcome back. Exercise 2, the 7 deadly wastes. Now you're going to find an awful lot of meat in this one. Again, take the time to sit with the individual members of your team and get them to challenge, not just them challenge, but you challenge everything that they do to see if any of the 7 deadly wastes are in their processes. Now, just as a reminder that we looked at rejects in the last lecture, but there are actually 7 of them, and you can remember them with the mnemonic worm pit. They are waiting, overproduction, rejects, motion, processing, inventory, and transport. And remember to challenge everything rigorously. You may be amazed by what you find. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. This lecture is called Modelling Excellence and Soup Questions. Now, a little while ago I mentioned the conversations I'd had with June, Kevin and Danny. You remember the one where June and Kevin spent the whole mornings raising orders, but Danny was done by 10:30. That's the one. Well, I said that raised a great question. Why is one person completing a task a full 90 minutes faster than her peers? And you should never underestimate the power of a good question. And this one is a soup question. Now, if you don't know what a soup question is, in the movie Finding Forrester, Sean Connery plays William Forrester, an author who published one great novel and then became a recluse. Now, he meets Jamal, a young savant played by Rob Brown, and early on in their relationship, Forrester asks Jamal to stir his soup, which is on the stove. Now, Jamal asks why, and Forrester explains that it is so a skin will not form. Now, Jamal has learnt something he can apply to all soups, and perhaps a bunch of other things too. Now, a few moments later, Jamal asks a personal question. Do you ever go outside? And Forrester explains, the object of a question is to obtain information that matters to us. That's my best Sean Connery impression. Now, in answering the personal question, nothing that mattered would be learned, unlike the soup question. Great movie. If you haven't seen it, you should. So, back to Danny. My first thought that this was my first thought was that this was perhaps a volume thing. Was Danny raising fewer orders than her peers? Now, a quick check demonstrated that this was not the case. The numbers showed that she was routinely processing 20 to 30% more, which in itself was interesting. So my second thought was maybe it was complexity, because different levels of spend required a different order process. But the stats across the week showed a little difference in the mix between the three. So I did what I normally do when I don't understand something. I asked her if I could sit with her for 10 minutes so she could talk me through how she raised orders, which she was happy to do. Now, her first step was to sort them by value. That way she could do all of her sub £100 orders first, which is one process, then her sub £500 orders, a different process, and finally her sub £1,000 orders, a third process. Well, that made sense because chunking is a well-known method to increase efficiency, so I noted that down. Now, the next thing she shared with me was that we always added some text to purchase orders, a disclaimer of some kind. Now, it was a short paragraph which for some reason was not filled in automatically by the system. Maybe we'd added it after we'd had the system installed or something. Anyway, she had this paragraph of text in a text file on her desktop. So when she began her ordering, she just opened the file, copied the paragraph to her clipboard and just hit paste on every order she did. And this saved her having to type out that same thing hundreds and hundreds of times. Very clever, very efficient. I noted that too. I figured these two things combined could be just enough to account for that difference. I had 2 more conversations to have. Now, at the end, I just hit OK and the orders get emailed, she told me. That's great, Danny. Thank you. It's been interesting and I think very helpful too, I said. I stood up. I thought we were done, and we were not. Can I ask you a question? She said. So I sat down again. Of course, shoot, I said. Why don't we email all the purchase orders? She asked me. Now that was an interesting question, a definite soup question. So I asked, rather than, and she said, rather than faxing and posting some. Faxing and posting. We were a decade and a half into the 21st century and we were faxing and posting, which meant we must also be printing. Now, I had to learn more, so I asked June and Kevin, and these were the 2 reasons, and I'll take them in order. Some of the suppliers can't accept orders by email, I was told. Now, I cannot express in words how much I love statements like this, and I have a stock response for just such occasions, which I always use. Yes, always. When was that last true? I asked. Now, this is a great question, even if I do say so myself. Oftentimes, something is tested and for one reason or another it didn't work, and at that point in time it is factually true that it didn't work. The problem is that it may be considered to be factually true forever, which is sometimes just not the case. Would it be factually true today? Now, at some point in the past, all of these statements were factually true. No, we tried to get a man to fly, no luck there, can't be done. It's physically impossible for a man to run a mile in 4 minutes. Now, would it still be factually true if you modified your approach? You can't drive from England to France, there's a whole lot of water in the way. Well, that was true until the Channel Tunnel was built. And would it be factually true if someone else tried it? You just can't knock Muhammad Ali down. And that was true until Henry Cooper tried it. Now, there is no doubt at some point in the early days of the internet, not everyone did have email, but that was quite a way back. Kevin, we asked about email. Me. When? Kevin. Well, me. Well, could we ask again? Okay, so the other response was the suppliers like us to fax or post them.
I asked that we had a quick chat with those suppliers and explained that we, as the customer, would no longer be able to fax or post orders. So if they wanted to continue trading with us, it would be electronically, either EDI or email. Funnily enough, they agreed. Anyway, I primed the team that Danny had found an excellent way for them to save a bucket full of time and make their lives easier, and that she was going to lead a bit of training to share her findings, which she did. No one was using the copy and paste trick, so that was a win. The chunking of orders by value had been hit and miss. Some people did it sometimes, so that was a win too. It was mostly a great success. Mostly because not everyone embraced the change. Now, I have 1,000 ways to get someone to do what I need them to do. I'm exaggerating. I have 47 actually. I usually start with the gentlest. I'd rather get someone thinking for themselves and come up with their own solutions. Now, sometimes I will guide people in the direction of the solution and let them take the rest of the steps themselves. Sometimes I'll tell them a story about a similar situation I've encountered or I've heard about, another well-known technique in hypnosis, and this may help them draw parallels with the current issue and spark a solution. Sometimes I just tell them this is the solution and hope that that will be enough. Now, my last resort is to be dictatorial. But sometimes when you've tried the nicer approaches, that's all that's left. Now, in this instance, with one person, being a leader didn't work. The truth was that over the years, that person had found ways to expand the tasks to fill the days, to prevent more boredom in all likelihood. The suppliers didn't like having the orders faxed. They couldn't understand why we did it, but hey, the customer's always right, right? He liked faxing orders. That individual could eke out the ordering by printing off some of the orders and then spending 20 minutes at the fax machine. He faxed orders because it helped to fill his day. Now, I had to adopt the manager role, for want of a better phrase, and explain that this was not a request. A better solution had been found and everyone was going to work the same way. If an even better way was found, we would do that, but no one would be printing or faxing or posting any longer. Okay, happy thoughts. When you have multiple people doing the same role, it's always a good idea to check if anyone is outperforming the others, either in speed or accuracy. If you find that this is the case, you certainly need to ask why. If they have a better way, adopt it. Some call it modeling excellence, but you could just call it copying. I think that just about covers time, so let's take a look at our second T, tools. I'll see you in the next lecture.
Okay guys, and welcome back. Exercise number 3, modeling excellence. Now, in the last lecture we looked at investigating teams to find out if two people who did the same job actually had different output, and this is an incredibly useful tool. So if you have any members of your team who are doing the same role, then investigate your statistics. If you're not capturing statistics, you should be, so start capturing statistics. Measure the performance of your best performer against your worst performer, and then investigate any disparity between the two. Odds are that you will find that they have a different method of working, and when you find the method that works the best, roll that out to the rest of the team and get them up to speed. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture.
Okay, and welcome to this section on tools, our second T. Now, you can use a watermelon to knock a nail in, but there are better options available. Now, this section is all about finding and utilizing those better options, and to do that we will exploit that thing that we've just got a bunch more of: time. Funnily enough, when you create a little more time to think about how to improve things, and then you improve them, you get even more time. It's a virtuous circle. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. $179.99, or the cost of solving a 10-year-old problem. Now, in one sales and distribution organisation, my team and I were in a remote building. Head office was 500 yards up the road. There were constant issues caused by delays in getting stocks that had arrived into the business booked into the system fast enough so that we could satisfy the sales orders and get them out the door again. Now, customers were getting orders late. Sometimes we couldn't find the incoming deliveries, and we went through a whole chasing exercise only to be told by the supplier that we'd actually signed for the package 3 weeks ago. It was not good. Now, over the years, in order to address the issue, the various managers of the receiving team had tried the old-fashioned way: throw more people at the problem. Great for a short-term fix, but it doesn't really solve the underlying problem, does it? Now, Danny, who we met earlier, had demonstrated that great quality: creativity. So I asked her if she would like to choose one of her peers and meet up with the warehouse team to see if we could assist. Remember, Danny gave us that extra 3 hours a day across the two people. So she agreed and had a chat with June, who was also roped into the project team. Now, less than 3 minutes later, I walked into our general office to see Danny, June and one of the warehouse team deep in conversation. I thought, wow, that was quick. It's great when people are chomping at the bit to make things better. When the warehouse guy had left, Danny and June came into my office and they said, do you mind if we go up to the main building after lunch? We want to see what's happening for ourselves, they asked. Great idea, I think. The Japanese philosophy, go to the problem, because you cannot always solve a problem sitting behind your desk. I didn't see them for the rest of the day. Now, the following morning, the two of them were sitting in my office waiting for me. This was either going to be very good or it was going to be very bad. It was very good. They were very excited. Go on then, what happened? I asked. They proceeded to tell me that the goods in was a mess. There were boxes and pallets everywhere, and it looked like it was all down to a time mismatch. Now, as the business was a fast turnaround business, we frequently ordered from some of the wholesalers twice a day. We ordered at night for delivery to us the following day about 10 a.m. and then we ordered by 1 p.m. for delivery to us that afternoon by 3 p.m. The goods receiving process was to perform a three-way check on all the deliveries. We count and check the physical stock, we match that against what's on the delivery note, we match that against what's on the purchase order. If we get a three-way match, the stock is booked in and it goes on the shelves ready to sell. Straightforward enough. There are boxes everywhere. When a new delivery comes in, half the time they don't have anywhere to put it. So they just shove it up an aisle until they can clear more room. But that means that they can't get a forklift truck into the aisle anymore to bring the pallets down, so they end up moving all of the boxes out of the way, using the forklift to get what they want, and then putting all the boxes back in the aisle, hopefully keeping the consignment all together. But the deliveries can get split, so if you have 4 out of 5 boxes in aisle D, the 5th may be somewhere else. They've got stuff down there from a month ago, they told me. I was waiting for a happy ending. It turns out they think it's our fault, and that wasn't the happy ending I was looking for. Now, in my experience, people rarely fail. Most people don't go to work to do a bad job. People don't fail, processes fail. One of my old bosses, Keith, real name, taught me that, and I was really hoping that this was going to be a process failure. So I had to know, why do they think it's our fault? Well, when a driver turns up with a delivery, they count off the boxes and sign his notes if it's right. Next, they find the delivery note and they look for the purchase order number. They note it down and they go to their purchase order file, pull out the purchase order and then go back to the delivery and start the check. The problems start when they haven't got the purchase order in the file. They can't check without it, so that delivery gets pushed out of the way and they move on to the next and start again. If they always had the purchase order, they could check the first time around and get the stock books on and onto the shelves. That's why Ash comes down twice a day now rather than just once. You can just tell when someone has had an epiphany. Anyway, we realised that we print the purchase orders for them, which Ash comes down for twice a day. But if we raise one after he's been and the driver arrives before Ash comes down again, they don't have a purchase order to check against because it's in our pile down here. Well, they had arrived at a soup question. Why didn't they print the orders themselves? And the answer was, they don't have a printer. They asked a few years ago, but no one would sign it off. But if they had a printer, they could print off the order as soon as we'd raised it. And there is no way a driver can get here faster than that. So they'd always be able to get it and check first time. Now I live for moments like this. This was great work. So I asked them to price it up, and then I called the head of IT and I asked him if he could spare 5 minutes for two of my team and Ash from the other department to have a quick chat. Now we already knew that the purchase had been rejected in the past, but it's all about presentation. If you want a yes, then ask the question in such a way that yes is the only possible answer. So the three of them visited Marty, the head of IT, and they asked the question beautifully. They said, would you like to solve a 10-year-old problem for $179.99? And he did. There was a backlog to clear, but there was light, and that light was created by getting the right people together and talking, and then getting out of their way and letting them shine. Within a few weeks we were all caught up. Deliveries were processed quickly, stock was on the shelves for our customers to buy. No one was having to chase deliveries anymore unless they really hadn't turned up, and we had a better working relationship with one of our internal customers. Such was the effect of that change that a lot of the business's KPIs, key performance indicators, were improving rapidly, and that caught the attention of the executive board. In my monthly report to them, I explained that Danny, June and Ash had taken this project on of their own accord and came up with a solution. But it did cost the business $179.99. The three of them were thanked personally by the board, and we had some new superstars in the making. Remember, it's not about you, it's about them. I'll see you in the next lecture.
Okay guys, and welcome back. This is your first exercise in the tools section, upstream and downstream problems. Now it could be that a problem exists within your department that you are completely oblivious to, but it is affecting someone else somewhere in the business, either upstream of your process or downstream. And that the opposite is also true. It could be that someone else is happily working away, but it's causing you an issue that they are just not aware of. So here's what to do. Nominate a couple of your team to go and engage with the wider business, particularly if you have something that's causing you a problem. Engage with the department that's causing you a problem and work with them to resolve it. Now, it's often the case that people who do the job day in, day out, cannot see what the issue is, but a fresh pair of eyes, that is, a pair of eyes from another department, often can. Woods for the trees. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture.
Okay, that really isn't singing, it's more humming. Anyway, mission mundane, or I can't not look. Now in the last lecture we looked at a failing process and how by putting the people with the operational knowledge and some spark of creativity together, the process was fixed and everyone's life became a lot less stressful. and it didn't require a £5 million investment to do it. Now the next story is an equally cheap fix and completely removed the possibility of missing something critical and important. Now when you buy capital equipment, there is a whole process of approval required before you go to market. If you bypass that first step, that approval, you can end up doing a whole lot of work which may end up going in the bin, because it turns out that no one is going to approve the project anyway. And there's an important lesson there. Do the work you know you have to do, rather than spend your time doing the work that you may never need to do. Anyway, I digress. Now, in one organisation that I worked in, there was a list of potential capital projects all vying for a very limited pot of money. Now the decision on which projects were allocated budgets to go ahead was taken by an executive board. The list was held on a shared Excel spreadsheet, I love Excel, on a shared server. So when a project got the green light, the status of that particular line was changed to approved, and that was when my team leapt into action, if they remembered to go and have a look. So these approvals could happen at any time, but that requires some form of communication to say, hey, you have a green light, go do your thing. The problem was that sometimes people would remember to do this and my team sprang into action, and sometimes they wouldn't, and we were sitting there doing other things all the time the clock had started ticking. Now, we had a solution. Twice a day we would open this Excel file and we would check if any new projects had been added or approved, and this worked well as long as you remember to look. If nothing changes for weeks, you can think, do you know what, I'll just check once a day, and eventually this can become, I'll check every other day, and before you know where you are, you've stopped checking altogether. Now Nigel and I were talking about this very problem when he suggested it would be much more helpful if the exec board would just remember to ping us an email if there were any changes. An elegant solution. Then we would never miss one, and we'd get busy immediately, giving us a better chance to deliver on time. Now that's a great idea, but as great as people are, you cannot always depend on them to remember to send you an email. And let's be honest, not all board members are receptive to the little guy banging on their door and saying, will you please remember to send me an email when you've approved something? It could be very career limiting. Now, as I say, people aren't great at this, but do you know what does this kind of thing really well? Computers. They never forget. They never get distracted by something else that they have to do, or by someone walking into their office, or by cream cakes. That could just be me. They never have to go to a meeting. They never have to leave early to pick the kids up. Computers are great at this kind of thing. So, I said at the start of this section that the one thing that people are great at is being creative. Now, I'm a firm believer that if something can be automated, you automate it. Computers are better than humans at this kind of things. They're faster, they're more reliable, and they're cheaper. To create a team of superstar performers, you must get computers doing computery stuff, which is a word, and free your people so that they can do what only they can. Now, I have a background in programming. Actually, I have a background in an awful lot of things, not because I'm particularly clever, but I am particularly lazy. And I discovered long ago that investing a little time now to teach a computer to do something that I was doing would make my life a whole lot easier. And this was one of those times. I asked Nigel to show me the file, which he duly opened. I asked what it was that he looked at to determine if we had the call to action, and he said he made a note of how many lines there were, which he kept on a post-it note on his monitor stand, and if it increased he knew that something had been added. He also counted how many lines had the status of approved, which he also kept on a post-it note, and if that number increased, something new had been approved. It was manual, but it was effective. Now, Excel gets a bad rap. You can't run a business off a spreadsheet. I've been told that so many times, and I normally answer, well, that depends on the spreadsheet. Now, Excel, in fact, the whole Office suite are incredibly powerful. They are great as standalone applications, but when you learn that you can have the individual elements talk to each other and do stuff all by themselves, it comes into its own. Now, a lot of users are quite happy to add columns of numbers, generate reports, put together presentations and send emails. But if you can describe those processes using logic and maths, the computery stuff, the Office suite can do all of that work for you. And the two best bits, almost every business in the world already has them, and it's so easy to learn how to make them work for you. Now, if you do have an interest in this, check out my Excel range of courses. There's a special discount offer at the end of this course. Could be the best investment you ever make. That's my sales pitch over. Okay, so back to Nigel. Using a bit of VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, the language that enables all of the Office applications to talk to each other, we set about automating the process. Now, the mechanics of this are covered in that VBA course, Excel Essentials, Level 3 VBA, or the complete Excel course. Okay, sales pitch over again. Here's what we did. We added a second hidden sheet to the spreadsheet, and we added a count formula on this second sheet to count the lines in the first sheet, and a count if formula to count the number of cells in the second column if they had the status of approved. We wrote some code that executed whenever the workbook was opened that added the current count and the count if to the second sheet. We wrote some code that executed before the workbook closed that added a new count and a new countif next to the ones we just recorded when it was opened. We wrote some code, a logical test, to say that if the first count matched the second count and the first countif matched the second countif, that is, when we open the file we had X number of lines, and when we close the file we have exactly the same number of lines, and when we open the file we had X number of approved lines and we still had the same number of approved lines, just go ahead and close the file. But if either of those two tests did not match, that means something new was added or something new was approved, then send an email to my team's general email address, which is monitored by everyone, saying changes have been made to the capital list. Now, those important people on the exec board never had to remember to email us again, as technology, very simple existing technology, would do that for them without them having to do a thing. We didn't even spend any money because we already had everything we needed. It just 15 minutes and a bit of code. We always read our emails, so there was no chance that we could ever miss one again. And once you show someone that something like this is possible, there's a paradigm shift. And that's what I want to achieve. I love it when we get to this point that people are saying, wow, if it can do that, can it do this? And the answer is usually yes. And that's when the snowball starts to roll. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back to your second exercise in the tool section. This one is all about automation. This is oftentimes a really easy win. Again, work with the individual members of your team to see if there is anything that they are doing that can be automated. Generally, anything that involves a PC is a prime target for these kinds of tasks. Now, if you don't have these skills in your department already, recruit the expertise of your IT department, and hopefully they have someone that you can use. Alternatively, you could offer this as a development opportunity to one of your team. Get them on a course that would teach them these skills, and once you realize what can be done, you'll find a lot more things that can be done. And remember to check out the last lecture of this course, because you can get a great discount on my Excel range of courses, which include automation. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture.
That's what I expected to see. Okay, and welcome back. Now, I said a little earlier that people don't fail, processes fail, and that's true, but people are fallible. No matter how good they are, no matter how much money you pay them, or how many letters they may have after their names, humans are prone to making mistakes from time to time. Now, in the bad old days, the solution would have been to add a checking function, because when you get two sets of eyes on the job, the chances of errors finding their way to your customer are reduced, not eliminated, but reduced. But this gives us two problems. One old problem, what if the checker also makes a mistake? And a new problem, you've just doubled your labour cost. So that's one solution, but wouldn't it be better to gear things to make it almost impossible for humans to make the error in the first place? Now, in the field of lean manufacturing, which we touched on a little earlier, it has a term for this, and it's called poka-yoke. Now, poka-yoke is from the Japanese poka, meaning mistakes, and yokeru, meaning avoid. And as the name suggests, it's all about avoiding mistakes. If you look, you will find examples of poka-yoke all around you. You'll be using them every day and you may never have noticed. And here are a few. Microwave ovens, they will not operate if the door is open. Overflows, that little hole near the top of your sink that stops you from having a flood. Washing machines will not start if the door is open, and the door will not open until the cycle stops. On your computer, USB plugs, they will only go into the socket one way. Okay, now I always cover this with my teams wherever there is a process, and that's just about everywhere. Test the process for failure points, and if there is any ambiguity, any chance for failure, change your process. Give yourself every chance of succeeding. And here's a really simple solution to a quality issue that had persisted within one business since day one. Now, this business sold products, nothing revolutionary there then. They sold thousands in small quantities and a few lines in volume, and the problem was in the volume lines. Now, when the order pickers had a variety of items to pick, the error rate was very low, because the nature of looking at a bunch of different things makes it less likely to make a mistake. I'll give you a real life example. Now, most of us go shopping, and a lot of us will take a shopping list with us if we have more than a few items to buy. So let's imagine we're going to buy furniture polish, strawberries, nappies and a tin of soup. An unusual shopping list, but that's our shopping list. So we take our list, we go to the appropriate area of the store, and we drop the items in our basket, and we're done. We wouldn't accidentally pick up a cauliflower in place of the strawberries because they look different. We know what strawberries look like, so our senses will guide us to them. If we accidentally picked up a cauliflower, we would notice. But what if you wanted to buy tangerines or clementines, not sure how you pronounce that, you know, those little oranges. Now, generally in a supermarket, all orange type products are grouped together for convenience, so you will have both tangerines and clementines right next to each other, and they look pretty much alike. Now, when you get there, you're aware of this, so you pay particular attention to the labelling. You take the time to read it and you pick the right one. Result. But could you get that right twice a day? Yeah, you probably could. 10 times a day? Pretty much. If you were to do it 1,000 times a day? Now, here's a curious thing that happens with humans. If we repeat an activity like this enough, we can see what we expect to see, even if it's not. After 2 hours of picking both, I may well pick up my shopping list, see that I want tangerines, pick up clementines, read the label and say, yep, they're tangerines. And this is the exact problem we had with the volume lines. The packaging was almost identical. One said product AA and one said product BB. 2 characters difference. Now imagine if you're picking AAs and BBs all day. Any chance that you could ever make a mistake and get them mixed up? Of course there is. Now, as these were volume lines, that is, we sold thousands of them every day, rather than just putting a box of AAs and a box of BBs on a bench and expect all the pickers to select the right one every single time, we changed the way the orders were sorted. Previously, they were printed out and distributed as the orders were raised by the boys and girls in the sales team, so a mix of both. But we did have the option to print by product, so all the AA orders would print, and then all the BB orders would print. All we needed to do was then give the AA orders to the AA team and ensure that only boxes of AA product went to their benches. Now, way down the other end of the assembly line, 50 yards away, the BB team would only receive BB orders and BB product. Now we only had two checks. Did the BB team get the BB orders, and did the BB team get the BB stock? And the same for the AA. Get that right and it's almost impossible to get it wrong. Now, not only did we eliminate the errors and therefore the customer complaints, we actually increased output because the pickers did not have to stop and check every individual pick note to see if the customer wanted AA or BB. After that initial check, when the pick notes and the stock arrived, they went on autopilot. Now, while we're talking about this kind of thing, I'll give you another perfect example I saw in the stationery industry when I was on a facility tour of a wholesaler. Pens. They sold millions of pens. They sold cases of pens, boxes of pens, and they sold pens individually. Now, the cases and boxes were picked by an automated system, which was very cool, but if a customer only wanted a couple, they were still picked by hand. Now, originally, all pens, the red pens, the blue pens, the green pens, and the black, were all stored next to each other, just like the oranges in our supermarket. But if you're picking hundreds a day, you could easily pick the wrong colour, and this is what they did. It was a stroke of genius. They stored each of the 4 colours in totally separate locations, which meant you couldn't accidentally put your hand in the blue pen box when you actually wanted a black pen. How clever is that? So error proofing is a valuable tool, and there will be many opportunities where you can utilize it to make things better. Now, we've covered time and tools. Let's have a look at our third T, talent. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back to exercise 3 of the tools section. Pokey. Now, in the last lecture we had a look at some of the elements, or at least one of the elements of lean manufacturing, pokey, or error proofing. Now, if something goes wrong more than once, the chances are there's an opportunity to error proof it, and it's a great team activity. Get them all in, spell out the issue, and indulge in some wild and crazy brainstorming. Now, oftentimes it's a common sense solution that is the right answer to any problem, but at least by getting all those ideas out into the open, it can spark that common sense idea. And remember, the common sense, not that common. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Talent. Okay guys, and welcome back. Now, if I had to pick a favorite, this is it. This is what humans have that computers don't. Talent. And I will use every tool in my toolbox to access this quality in my team. We each have our own individual unique style, our own experiences, and with the right coach and the right environment you can get an explosion of creativity. And you'll remember that I define creativity literally. Now, in my experience, the one thing that stifles creativity and innovation more than any other factor is apathy, and it can come about for any number of reasons, but it can be reversed. Now, the problem with problems is that people just kind of get used to them. If their experience is that they don't have any power to do anything about them, and no one listens when they mention them anyway, why bother? So, when I encounter this situation, I have another stock question, a soup question, which I use to help people get to an even better question. And here's my question. If you were to start this business today, would you do it the way you're doing it now? Now, almost all of the times I've asked this question, and that's a lot of times, I get the response that I want. Occasionally, I'll get the other response, but I'll come back to that later. Now, using one question to stimulate another is a technique that's been around for a couple of thousand years now. A really clever fellow came up with the concept. His name was Socrates. Now, Socrates believed that people already have the answers they are looking for, and that by asking the right questions, those answers will be drawn forth. Now, there's a whole teaching method based on this called the Socratic method, after the great man himself, and I'm a big believer in the Socratic method. Okay, where was I? Right. If you were to start this business today, would you do it the way you're doing it now? Now, the answer to this question is normally no, and no is the best possible answer, because that gets us to that even better question. If I didn't do it this way, which way would I do it? And what this second question gives us is an incredibly powerful tool, possibility. And with possibility comes hope. And I know you remember what Napoleon said, a leader is a dealer in hope. So, if we didn't do it this way, how would we do it? We've stimulated thought, we've opened our minds to the possibility that things could be done differently, better even. Now we're coming up with ideas, and that gets us halfway to where we need to be. Now, I mentioned earlier that ideas are 10 a penny. Everyone has ideas. The difference between the regular and the great is that the great do something with them. They take action. They turn those ideas into reality. They create. Okay, so if they can turn those ideas into reality themselves, then that is fantastic. But sometimes we need either the help of others, or it's more expeditious to let others help us. Either option gets us the rest of the way. Now, it's worth taking a minute to explore that a little further, as there's an important distinction hidden in there. Even though some individuals have a certain flair for something, or possess a particular skill set, I always encourage people to become multi-skilled. Though it can be quicker and easier to always give the math problem to the math guru, or the people problem to the people person, or the process problem to the process person, it denies us a great learning opportunity. And I find it's better to encourage people to develop some level of skill in as many disciplines as they're interested in learning about. And there's a very good reason for that. It's the first law of cybernetics and one of the presuppositions of NLP, and it goes like this: the person with the most flexibility of behavior will control the system. Now, put another way, if you have a single skill and you only have one tool in your toolbox, great if the job at hand requires that tool, not so good if it needs a different tool. Now, the more skills you have, the more tools you have at your disposal, and the more tools you have, the more situations you can adapt to, the greater your flexibility. And the person with the greatest flexibility will always prevail. And that's what I want. I want a team that will prevail. Now, with each new skill that your team acquire, they become more potent, more rounded, more capable, more adaptable, both individually and as a collective. And that's a beautiful thing to see, both for me and for them. Now, here's the thing. Once they can take that first step and come up with an idea and make it real, change something for the better, get that sale, negotiate that deal, whatever it is, they realize that they have something of value to contribute, and that they have. All of a sudden, they are not powerless to affect what they do and how they do it. They can achieve. They can make a difference. They have influence. They are important. They have value. And never underestimate the power of inclusion and achievement as motivators. So, talent. In the next few lectures, we're going to take a look at a few simple ways to develop talent and help your team become the superstars that they can be. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. planes and peer brains. Okay, and welcome back. Now, in many professions there are formal qualifications that you can take, and sometimes they are essential, but sometimes less so. Whichever route your team took to get to where they are is fine, but it never hurts to tap into the peer brain. Now, in the aviation industry, it has the most efficient, all-inclusive system I have heard for communicating new learnings amongst its peers. Wherever there is an accident and the investigators are called in, whatever they find the cause of the accident to be is immediately communicated to every airline in the world, so that particular reason for an accident should never reoccur. Now, I've used this method for a number of years at organisational level, particularly when you have a team of people doing the same job. I first learned of it in the automotive industry at a time when steel prices were going through the roof. China had just started manufacturing cars, so the world demand on steel increased sharply. And when demand is greater than supply, prices go up. Now, this was public knowledge. It was in the papers, it was on TV. No one could deny that this was a legitimate issue, and every supplier was approaching us telling us that our prices had to go up because the cost of raw materials had gone up, and we all knew it. Now, the organisation I worked in, who manufactured cars, had 70 plus buyers and senior buyers all getting similar demands from their suppliers. Steel is up 20%. I can't remember what the actual number was. So we need to raise our prices by 20%. It's not our fault. Everyone is in the same boat. It's on TV. So it sounds reasonable on the surface, but some less experienced buyers had already accepted the increase. But when the cost of production increases, someone has to pay for it. Now, you can either pass that on to your customer, and generally customers don't like to pay more for something, or you can take a hit on your profit, and generally businesses don't like to make a loss in profit. Simple version. So now, an experienced buyer would know that if the price of steel increases by 20%, the only way your price should increase by 20% is if you are buying steel. So if you're buying something made of steel, it's only the cost of the steel element that costs more, not the entire cost of the item. So if we were buying gadgets for $10, and the cost of that was $5 in steel and $5 in everything else, production, distribution, sales, marketing, support staff, profits, all that sort of stuff, then the 20% should only apply to the $5 spent on steel. The cost of the marketing team didn't go up by 20% because they're not made of steel. So as most tenders that we use detailed how the supplier's costs were made up, something that we asked for, we could easily see what portion of our total cost was in raw materials, steel in this instance, and from there we could calculate what the actual effect of the increase really was. Procurement 101. Okay, so in this organisation we had an online info share system, just like the aviation industry, where useful bits of information like this were immediately cascaded by email to the whole of the company, and that way if someone had a great idea, everyone could immediately utilize it in their own work. Okay, now you don't need a sophisticated system to do this, just an email and someone who can coordinate, receive the information in from individuals and cascade it out again to everyone. Simple and effective. Now, I put a partly automated version in at my next company for the estates managers. We had a few hundred properties all over the country. They just filled in a template with their great idea and emailed it to the boss's assistant, and those templates populated a weekly digest with a summary and a link to the main article, which we stored on a shared server, which was then emailed out on every Friday afternoon. Now, sure, it took an extra 5 minutes a week, but the benefits of tapping into the peer brain were enormous. Technically, you could consider that a tool, but it's a great one to share talent. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back to the first exercise in the talent section, InfoShare. In the last lecture we had a look at InfoShare, and I cannot stress this strongly enough. If you are not doing this already, start it today. Now, if you can automate it, that's absolutely fantastic. If you can't automate it yet and you have some admin support within your team, make it part of their role. If you can do neither immediately, then nominate someone in your team who can coordinate this activity for you. But one way or another, make sure that you get it done, because the dividends are amazing. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Where are my trousers? Okay, cast your mind back a little. Do you remember when I told you about the capital list, the one where we had an email that sent automatically if there were any changes? Well, this next one began with that. Now, I like to keep in touch with my team, and sometimes I sit in the same office with them, but I would prefer not to. I find it's easier to have my own office, as it avoids having to find somewhere to go if you need to have a meeting or a private discussion. Just close the door and you're there. Where was I? Anyway, so yes, I like to keep in touch with my team. Now, I will normally have chats with each member of my team every day, but I also like to get us all in a room at least once every week or two routinely. But if something good has happened or we have an urgent problem to solve, we do it as often as possible. So it was on just such an occasion when I asked Nigel to talk the team through the capital list process, the auto emailing one. Now, this serves two purposes. It puts Nigel in the limelight to showcase his achievements, and it also puts some new information in the team brain, and that could be just the catalyst that someone needs to join some dots together. And this is what I mean about creativity. Okay, so Eve said that she'd had a guy on the phone this morning asking where his trousers were. Seriously. In process terms, he had raised a requisition for some new work trousers. It was approved by his line manager and a purchase order had been raised, but that was a week ago and he still hadn't received his trousers. It makes you wonder what the guy was walking around in. Anyway, something was not working as it should. I asked Eve how that could happen, and she explained that the system batched orders and an email routine sent them 4 times a day. Sometimes a couple may be missed, so she would have to intervene manually and email those orders individually. I asked how she did that, and she proceeded to tell me and the group 4 times a day she would receive a system email listing the orders that had been sent successfully. Cool. Then 4 times a day she would copy those order numbers into her spreadsheet. She would open the file containing all the purchase orders that should have been sent. She entered all the new numbers from that file into her spreadsheet to check that the orders in the folder had a corresponding entry from the successfully sent email. If so, great. If not, they're the ones that she has to resend manually. Simple. Now, one of my favourite quotes is by William Blake, and William Blake said, "A man's desires are limited by his perceptions. He cannot desire what he has not yet perceived." And that was the case here. This is how Eve applied her creativity. She noted that it was possible to automatically have Excel send an email from Outlook based on a test, something she didn't know before. New information. Now she used that information to come up with an interesting question. If you can make code write an email, can you make it read one? She asked. Now she thought of something that I had never even considered in all the years that I've been doing this. She joined together some dots that I have never seen. I have written dozens of auto email routines based on data in spreadsheets over the years, but I've never come across a problem that would need to do the reverse, to read an email and then do something. Now I had a question. Are the system generated emails all the same except for the order numbers? That is there something common I can look for in them all? Now the thing with coding is that if you can apply a set of rules, you can code it. Even multiple rules you can code. But if it came to deciphering an email from a human and interpreting that, the rules of grammar, expression, terminology, it would just be too complicated for the benefit that we could gain. She said they were. I don't know, I told her, but I would find out. So I googled around a bit and I found that it could be done. I sat with Eve and we worked out what those rules were.
We scan the inbox for emails with a specific title from a specific sender, the system email. If none were found, the code ended. If we found such an email, we would read the text and we would copy everything between the words "were successfully sent" and before the words "this email was generated by," and that's in between there was where the order numbers lived. We would open the Excel file automatically, go to the correct sheet, go to the end of the range in column A and paste our order numbers in there. We would get the order numbers from the order folder if they didn't appear in column B already. That is, everything that is new. Now for each order number in column B, we would check for a match in column A, the successfully sent orders. If matched, move to the next. If not, highlight that cell in column B because that is what we need to action. Repeat until the end. Okay, so once the code had been added, that process executed in under 4 seconds. Now doing it manually took 20 minutes, and remember that was 4 times a day. So that's almost an hour and 20 minutes freed to do even more creative things. Now a week later, Eve presented this innovation to the team and a frenzy of other things that we could automate ensued. Now I love it when people get excited. Now part of Eve's role was to train the wider business in the use of our system, something she struggled to find the time to do successfully in the last year or so. But as this process was now automated, she can now do this with having to get back and check if orders had been sent successfully. At last we were delivering on our training promise. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. This is your second exercise in the talent section, and it's about Limelight and more ideas. Now if you're not meeting with your team on a regular basis, start now. This is something you should do as a matter of course, and not only to share what's going on within your department but also what's going on in the wider business. Now the added bonus of this is that you also have a captive audience, and you can use that to showcase anything, and I mean anything, that has been improved. Now don't hog the spotlight. If something has gone well, no one wants to sit there and see the boss take the credit for it. Whoever did the project, whoever came up with the idea, whoever implemented a solution or an improvement, let them talk about how they came up with the idea, how they improved the process, what went well, what they could perhaps do better next time. Let them show off a little. This could be just the catalyst you need to spark the next little or big idea. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. What would Jesus do? Okay, I stole that line straight out of the movie Transformers, but it's so much more than a throwaway line from a thoroughly entertaining movie. Now, I am all for on-the-job training. In fact, I've learned something from almost everyone I've ever worked with, and I don't just mean the managers I've worked for, I mean everyone who's worked for me too. Now, we kind of touched on this a little earlier with Danny and the order processing, but it can be applied elsewhere too. Now, a lot of roles feature some element of human interaction. Salespeople, customer services, procurements, there are lots of them. But have you ever noticed how some people just seem to have a gift when it comes to dealing with others and getting the result that they want? Now, I once sat in on a sales meeting and it was one of the most enlightening experiences I've ever had. The director led the session and displayed on a graph that was projected onto a huge wall with the sales figures for the whole of the sales team of about 15 people. Now the graph showed that 12 people had made no sales. 2 of them had made a couple of sales, but one guy had sold thousands. Now that was interesting. Now the objective was to sell our services to deliver a particular item that a year or so ago had received some bad press. It was mistakenly thought to be unsafe, but this had long since proven to not be the case at all. And over the last 3 months our sales team were on a drive, and between them they had visited
every customer in the country, but only one guy was selling. Now immediately the room erupted. No one's buying, they said. No one wants to use it, they lamented. Everyone thinks it's unsafe. The complaints just went on. Now the results on the wall showed that statistically they appeared to be right, but that one anomaly, that outlier, bucked the trend. Clearly this was only true in almost all of the country, but not in that little patch looked after by our star sales guy. Now one of the Zero salesmen leapt to his own defence and he said, I had a meeting with Bob Jones. I told him, Bob, I know this item got some bad press a while back because someone claimed it was unsafe, but that's all behind us now. It's perfectly safe. It's proven. You have nothing to worry about. But I couldn't convince him. The guy doesn't want to buy. And right off the back of that, another Zero seller chipped in. Tell me about it. I had the same conversation with Emily Worthington down south. Emily, I said, I know what you're thinking. You don't want to buy this because it's not safe, right? Well, just look at all this research that I have with me. Pages and pages of reports proving how safe it is. Scientific proof. No one can argue with that, but she was having none of it. Now, almost everyone agreed that the reason no one was buying was that they just couldn't get over that initial story that the product was unsafe. Our star salesman was just looking at everyone in complete disbelief, and the director asked, how is it that you sold so many, Chris? Now, that's a soup question. Well, I met Ian Anderson first. We got a coffee and I asked him what the problem was. Why wasn't he buying this product? He told me he was really struggling to find enough fitters to go out and do the installations. There's a shortage of fitters in his area, so there was no point in buying something that he couldn't sell. So I explained how we offered this fitting service. Sure, it would cost a little more than using his own guys, but the profit he would make on the item itself would more than cover that. He bought 500 and we got some extra work for our fitters, which we make a profit on. Nice, I thought. So he went on. The following morning I had a meeting with Elaine Greer. I told her we were now stocking this item and asked why she hadn't placed an order yet. And she said that she had plenty of fitters, but the 30-day payment terms that we offer means that she couldn't turn a profit fast enough to pay us without squeezing her cash flow. I asked if we extended it to 45 days, if that would help, and she said no, but if you can give me 60 days credit, then I wouldn't have a problem. And she bought 500 too. I was really starting to enjoy this. Anyway, Chris continued, I went to Sam Johnson in the afternoon. You know Sam, he's got that little shop near the river. Anyway, I said, Sam, everyone is stocking these now. How come you haven't ordered any from us? And put them where, Chris? You know how small my place is. I can't store thousands. I'd be lucky if I could hold 20. Now, I asked him if we could deliver them 10 at a time, if that would solve his storage issue, and he agreed that it would. Now, he didn't want to take the extra delivery cost, so we agreed a reduced rate for delivery, but our vans are in that area every week anyway, and we would make far more than that on the item. He was happy, and he placed his order the following day. Everyone in the room was getting uncomfortable. So how did you get around the safety issue, Chris? One of them asked him. What safety issue? There isn't a safety issue. These guys know their industry. They read the trade magazines. Everyone knows there's no issue. I just asked them to tell me their problem and then I offered to solve it for them. And what Chris had done that no one else thought of was to find out what his customer problem was before offering a solution. What everyone else did by reminding their customers of that initial scare was to plant the seed of doubt, and they gave them the reason not to buy. Anyway, we left it a month and then we started a campaign of solving the customer's problem, and that went very well. Now, I shamelessly stole this idea. In our monthly team review meetings, I always have each member of the team tell the story of how they achieved what they achieved, what worked well, what didn't work so well, how they modified their approach to get a better result. And people love to talk about themselves, and if anyone in the room can learn something from their experience, well, that's time worth taking. And the added bonus is that it can turn into a friendly camaraderie between the team members. So if you got 25,000 this month, I'm going to get 30,000 next month, and on it goes. So if you have someone who's exceptional in your team, let them tell the story. Have other members shadow them. You can learn a lot just by observing. Now, I learned a lot from one of my early managers, Bill. That's his real name. Now, Bill never lost his temper or raised his voice in all the years that I knew him. He always found a different way. And when I'm faced with similar situations, I ask myself, what would Bill do? Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. This is your third exercise in the talent section. What would pick your own hero do? Now, if you can't come up with a solution by yourself, become someone else. Now, I know it sounds a bit strange, but many times I've sent members of my team to a meeting in my stead, and they've come back and they've explained what they've agreed, and they've said, that's what you would have done, and they've been absolutely right. If you have a leader or a mentor or someone that you look up to, someone that you know reasonably well, either personally or by reputation, ask yourself what they would do. Now, this breaks you out of your own thought processes and allows you to access different ones. I know it sounds a little strange, but try it. You'll be amazed at the results. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. The 3 T's summary. Okay, there it is, my 3 T's model: time, tools and talent. I've used this over many years and I've seen some amazing transformations, both in businesses and in individuals alike. Now, I literally have hundreds and hundreds of these stories, but in one organisation I was brought in to transform an underperforming procurement team. This team were in trouble. They cost more to keep than they actually delivered. In the preceding year they had delivered 90,000 in savings over 3 deals between the 6 of them, and they'd been working the same way for years. But by applying this model, that team went on to deliver over $1 million in savings every year for the next 5 years, covering some 1,007 deals in total, which is a few more than the 3 they did before. Not only that, they produced over 130 documented process improvements. That's 1 every 10.5 days. Now, how's that for innovation? Now, in a different organisation, the time that we'd freed afforded us the opportunity to meet more suppliers and get a better handle on what was going on in the marketplace. Now, one conversation alone saved that organisation £130,000 because the supplier knew of a new government subsidy that we could access that we were just not aware of. And it's amazing what happens when you have the time to let the people who know a market well tell you all about it. And in another organisation, I use this model to remap which team members perform which tasks and how. Now, at the beginning, we had 3 of the team members who absolutely hated their jobs, and they were frequently absent from work with stress. And within 3 months, the absence in that team had dropped to below the organisational average, and the team were delivering better results than ever, and they were actually enjoying themselves. Now, probably one of the nicest things that's ever happened to me. I once met the partner of one young man who thanked me for whatever I had done to him. She said that it seems when every day when he got up, he hated going to work and he constantly talked about quitting. Now he caught the earlier bus to work and he spent half of the night telling her about all the great things that he'd done that day to make things better. That guy has since been promoted a few times. Okay, I love my job. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome to section 3. Now in this section we're going to look at some everyday and not so everyday situations. We'll discuss getting great staff in and the interview process I've used successfully over the years. We'll go over a very simple thing you can do to ensure that their arrival is as smooth as possible, pleasurable even. We'll take a look at motivation and the most powerful and practical ways to drive your teams to success. Then we're going to learn about meetings, the reasons for having them and who you need there, and even if you should or shouldn't attend. And finally, I'm going to tell you about a couple of big things that I learned from two of my former managers, one good, one bad. And then we'll wrap the session up with what to do with people who need to exit the business. Okay, enjoy, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. Getting them in, interviews. Now, interviews can be a stressful event, not only for the person being interviewed, the person doing the interview is also under some pressure to fill a vacancy with the right person. Now, I know there are hundreds of books to teach you how to do a great interview, but for what it's worth, here's my take on it. Unless there is an overwhelming reason for a formal interview process, you should conduct your interviews informally. Now, I don't mean put your feet up on the desk while sipping a mojito, just realise that the person opposite you is human, and though you may have seen their CV, you know nothing about them as individuals or anything about their situation. They could be feeling incredibly stressed, and when people are stressed, you're not going to get the best out of them. Now, I was once preparing for an interview for a bunch of people for a role that I needed to fill in a manufacturing company, and policy dictated that a representative from the human resources department sat in on every interview. So about half an hour before the first candidate was due to arrive, Julie, the HR rep, and I entered the room where the interviews were due to take place. Now, there was a square desk and 4 chairs. There were only going to be the 3 of us, so I moved the spare chair into another room. I came back and we had 2 chairs on one side of the desk and 1 opposite. I moved the one of the 2 to the side of the table, so we had 3 sides with a chair and 1 without. "What are you doing?" Julie said. "I'm arranging the chairs." "You must sit opposite the candidate." "I don't think so. I like to sit either beside or adjacent to them. It makes them feel more comfortable. It's not the army, you know." "It's an interview. They shouldn't feel comfortable." Wow, we had a fundamental difference of opinion on that one. Do everything you can to make your potential new employee as comfortable as possible. Arrange your chairs in a non-confrontational style. It shouldn't be a headmaster and naughty child situation. So here's my checklist. I'll summarize this at the end, but here's the format. Firstly, be on time. Don't keep your interviewee waiting. They took time out of their day and possibly had to travel to be there. You were already there, so you have no excuse. Greet them. When they arrive, greet them at the door and shoot the breeze while you show them to the room where the interview will be held. If you can't greet them personally, have someone who can have a friendly chat with them show them through. You want people to be comfortable. I've already covered the seating arrangements. Next, be courteous. Offer them a tea, a coffee or a water. No one wants to sit there with a dry mouth. Thank them for taking the time to come in. They may have had to sacrifice half a day's holiday to come to the interview, or find their way to somewhere they've not been before. They had to pay to park, possibly. Worth a thank you, I think. Next, introduce yourself. Tell them who you are and what you do for the company. If there are other people in the room, HR, your second in command, whoever, introduce them and explain why they're there. Tell them what you're looking for. This sets the frame for the way people should answer. If they know what you're looking for, they can structure their responses to suit. Now, my person spec is quite simple. I can summarize it in one sentence. I want someone with teeth. And by that I mean someone who is capable of speaking out. If they see something they think can be done better, I want to hear about it. I expect them to have the courage to challenge, and that includes challenging me, because I don't always have the best answers either. So having someone with a bunch of great ideas that will never see the light of day is not going to help us develop. Next, explain the process. If there is going to be a second interview stage, let them know. If you're looking for someone to start in 2 weeks, Tell them that. If you or someone else are going to take notes, explain that up front too. The sales pitch. Sell the job to them. It's not a done deal. I've known many people turn down offers as they weren't sold on it. Let them know why this is the company they should choose, and they do have a choice. Next, be natural. Speak to them as if you were just two people talking. Find something interesting in their CV. If there is something particularly impressive in their CV, tell them it sounds impressive. A little flattery never hurt anyone. And then ask them to talk you through it. Now, if you have to follow one of those horrible competency-based interview formats, you know the ones, tell me about a time when you had to deal with a particularly difficult customer. Change the words. No one speaks like that. Instead, ask them, who was the worst customer you ever had? And from there you can draw more information out of them. What did you do? How did that work out? You manage to speak to people and learn about them outside of work all the time, and an interview is no different. People are more likely to respond naturally if they're not talking to a robot. And if you need clarification, ask. Okay, now allow time for any questions that they may have. Now, meet the team without you. This is one thing that I always do that I've never actually known anyone else do at all. I always do this if I think I have a candidate that I would like to have in my team. Prime your team beforehand and explain to the candidate that you would like them to spend 15 or 20 minutes with the team while you are not there. Tell them they can speak to anyone and ask them anything about the job, about the company, if you're a horrible boss, anything at all. This serves three purposes. For the candidate, it gives them the chance to break out of interview mode, speak to their potential new colleagues, and get a feel from the people doing the job what it's really like. For the team, it involves them in the process, and I always ask my team for their first impressions. It's important that any new person can fit in and get along with the existing team members. And for me, it can give useful feedback on the morale of the team. If the candidate comes back into the room and says they've changed their minds and they don't want the job, there is some work to do. Now, allow a little more time for any questions that they may have off the back of spending some time with your team. Right, finally, recap on the process, tell them when they're likely to hear from you, thank them for their time, and then show them back to reception. To summarise, be on time. Greet them, offer them a drink, introduce yourself and anyone else in the room, tell them what you're looking for, explain the process, give them the sales pitch, be natural with your questions, allow time for their questions, and if appropriate, spend some time with the team, allow a little more time for any questions off the back of that, recap, thank them, and show them out. And that's it. There are a few elements to it, but it's always worked very well for me. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. The welcome bucket. Now, here's a question for you. How many times have you started a new job and even though you agreed a start date a month ago, nothing was ready for you? Now, I once did an interim role for 6 months and for the first 5, I didn't have a phone. There is really no excuse. Now, if you know you have a new starter, plan for their arrival. You will generally get more than enough notice to sort out a desk, a phone and set up email accounts. You just need to plan. Now, if your procedure dictates that someone reads your IT policies prior to getting an internet access, send it to them before they start. That way, everything can be set up on their first day. If they need to wear a uniform, ask them for their size when you send out the offer letter. Then they just have to pick it up on day one. Now, the best example I have ever seen was with an American company I worked for years ago. Not only was there a desk, a phone and a fully working computer ready for me on the day of arrival, there was also a welcome bucket. Now, you know when you start a new job and you have to borrow a pen or a pair of scissors or a few post-it notes from the person sitting next to you? Not there. Everyone had a welcome bucket. The bucket itself was your waste paper bin, and inside was every bit of stationery you were ever likely to need. Pens, pencils, stapler, staple extractor, calculator scissors, post-it notes in 3 sizes, a ruler, highlighters, and a little note saying welcome to your new job. If you need anything else, just contact Joe on extension 0001. This was the most well thought out start to a job I'd ever had. And this is another idea I shamelessly stole. Whenever I have a new starter, they get a welcome bucket. For the sake of a little thought and maybe $5 worth of stationery, you can make any new starter feel instantly at home. And that's a small price to pay. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. Mr. Motivator. So, you've inherited a team, or built a team, or some blend of the two. How do you like the fire in their bellies to do a great job? Motivation. Now the strangest thing with motivation is that logical order of things is often reversed. Common sense would suggest that you get yourself motivated and then you go do it. And sometimes this can work, but often it's the other way around. You start doing something and the act of doing motivates you to continue. It's just like going to the gym. It's easy to go regularly once you're going regularly. It's getting those first few visits in that takes the most effort. So staying with the gym example, the greatest amount of force or effort is required to take that first step, visit number 1. That's when you go from a complete cold start to actually getting off the couch, getting your gym kit on, out of the house and all the way to the gym. Once you have visit number 1 under your belt, visit number 2 doesn't need quite so much effort. Visit number 3 is easier still, as you've already been twice, and before you know it, you're in motion. You are going to the gym, not just once, but consistently. As Newton's first law states, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. So the first thing we need to do is address how to generate sufficient oomph to take that first step that will set us in motion. And the answer is surprisingly simple. We make the first step as small and easy to take as possible. Now that's where my 3 T's model really comes into its own. By making small, incremental, painless changes sets us in motion, and once we're in motion it's harder to stop than it is to continue moving forward. Now the more cynical amongst you may be thinking it's not harder to stop, but it really is. Once we've made that first small change, we have visit number 1 in the bag, and now we have a little more time, our first T. Visit number 2 is easier still, as we've just created time for it. And once you cross that threshold where it becomes easier to continue than it would be to go back, achieving becomes part of our identity. And that is the most powerful motivator of all. Let me explain. If we achieve something, we've achieved something once. It's an isolated event. The second time we achieve something, it demonstrates that the first time wasn't a fluke. The third time, a pattern is starting to form, and we continue to achieve. And before too long, we are achievers. That's not just something we do, it actually becomes part of who we are, part of our identity. And that's an incredibly powerful thing. It's human nature to behave in a manner consistent with our beliefs. If we are achievers and we do it so often it becomes part of our identity, we act in accordance with that belief. We continue to achieve because that's just who we are. To not would be incongruous. So it's simpler and more natural to just keep going. It really is harder to stop. So that's the most powerful motivator. Let's have a look at some others. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. Whose company is it anyway? Now I touched on this a little earlier in the introduction to the talent section of the 3 T's. Do you remember when I asked the question, if you were to start this business today, would you do it the way you're doing it now? I said then that most of the time I get the answer that I want, but occasionally I get the other answer. And the other answer is usually some variation of one of these. I just work here. It's not my company. That's your job. And what we have here is a lack of investment, a short-term view. Someone actually said the last one to me when I asked them what they'd achieved in the last year. That's your job. I explained that my job was to make sure that he still had one next year. Blunt but true. If everyone who worked in an organisation took the view that they just worked there, who would ensure that the organisation survived? Okay, so some people separate the two things. There is the company and there is them, two disparate things connected only by the fact that they happen to work there. Now I always challenge these kinds of responses by explaining that it is my company. Not only that, it is also their company. And both statements are true regardless of who the actual owner of the company is. While I'm working in my company, whichever company that happens to be at the time, I will do everything I can to ensure that the company is as successful as possible. It's not altruistic, it's selfish. I owe it to myself. If I want to have a regular source of income, pay the mortgage, feed the kids, go on holiday for years to come, I need to make sure that all of my actions are geared towards the success of my company. Of course, the added benefit is that in doing that it also helps everyone else there enjoy the same security. But I'd rather not do it on my own. It would be much easier if there was an army of people all doing exactly the same thing. Better for me, better for them, better for the company. Now, I ensure that everyone in my team understands that this is their company. They may not have ownership of the whole thing, but they certainly own their part of it, their job, what they do. Now, you may encounter some people who absolutely hate their job. They don't like anything about it. They don't like the company, they don't like the culture, they don't like the people, they don't like the job, they may not even like you. With those people, I explain that they do have a choice. They can turn the job into something that they do enjoy by engaging, becoming involved and changing the things that don't work well, making the things that do work well work better, and generally owning the living daylights out of it. And if progression is their goal, this isn't a bad approach. Or they can choose to get a different job. I'm not being harsh here, but practical. You spend more of your waking hours at work than any other place, and if it makes you completely miserable, you should find something that makes you happier. Why put yourself through that every day? Now, it may not be a palatable choice, but it is a choice. Okay, happy thoughts. We've covered what I believe to be the two most powerful motivators. Now let's take a look at a rather practical one. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. Money, that's what I want, as the Beatles said. Now, all other things being equal, money will be the deciding factor on whether you keep the people you have or manage to recruit new ones. Now, you can do everything right as a leader. You can create a great environment for your team. You can create opportunities for people to shine, develop and grow. You can offer them hope. You can buy them cakes on a Friday even. But on a practical note, you need to pay them what they're worth too. Now, the overall budget for your company may not be within your control, unless it is, but compensating your team appropriately is vital. The Human Resources Department will usually have a handle on this, and it's worth checking with them. They will know what the going rate for a particular role in a particular industry in a particular area is, and hopefully your company should at least be able to offer the going rate. If not, you're at immediate risk of losing your staff to companies that pay more, particularly at the lower end of the pay scale. Now, when I was in my early 20s, I used to work for one of the major employers in my area. Everything was stable until a now rather well-known European budget supermarket chain came to the UK, and they opened a store half a mile from our factory. They paid their checkout staff far more than our production and warehousing staff, and we lost around 20% of our workforce in a month. Even if your team are paid at least the going rate, you should do everything you can to make the case to whoever has the ultimate decision over budgets to allow enough money in your budget to reward your star performers adequately while you can. I'll elaborate. Now, there are public and private companies. Public companies, as they are publicly accountable, tend to have bandings for particular roles. So, for example, if you're a band 3, you know you will earn a minimum of X and a maximum of Y. And the only way to earn more than that is to move up a band. It's understood. But there's something that strikes me as odd. Well, not odd, just downright stupid. I've worked in the public sector, but none of my teams have ever earned the top of their band. And when I asked why this was, I was told it's because there's always room for improvement. If you pay them the top of their band, no matter how exceptional they are, you're telling them they can't improve. Really? I think it says, I recognise you do an incredible job, and for that I am going to give you the maximum amount of money I can. Okay, now in the private sector, there's no such public accountability. But, at least in my experience, a similar thing seems to happen to some degree. Once you are in, there is no pressure to ensure your salary keeps up with the market rate. Now, I've presented many cases to various financial directors demonstrating why we need to pay Bob Smith X thousands more, and they look at me and say, but that's 75%. Now, obviously there are factors that determine how much you can pay people, profitability being the biggest, their contribution being another. But a percentage shouldn't be in the list, in my view. And here's why. Someone is worth precisely what someone else will pay them. Else being the operative word. Now, never was this more painfully obvious to me than when I had just finished drafting an email to my finance director to give me a lump of money in my budget so I could give one of my superstars the pay rise that she had earned. Now, I knew he would use the percentage argument, but I had presented what I thought to be an overwhelming case that the value she delivered far outweighed the amount I was asking for. I was about to hit send just as she walked into my office. I told her I was about to send an email to the FD explaining why we needed to give her a noticeable pay rise, and she started crying, and then I noticed that she had an envelope in her hand. We sat down and I asked if the envelope contained what I thought it contained. It did. It was her notice, and as the mafia say, someone had made her an offer she couldn't refuse. I asked what any manager faced with losing a valued member of the team would ask. What can I do to make you stay? Now, she explained how she loved her time in our department, all the things she'd learned, the opportunities, the environment, the autonomy, in fact everything that I wanted to hear. So it was money, pure and simple. I asked her what the number was, and she said double. Now, there was absolutely no way I could get a 100% pay raise for her, although I did ask. I knew her offer was above market rate, but I'd seen her develop, her achievements, her potential for even more, and now someone else had seen it too, and they were prepared to pay to acquire that talent. This is the only disadvantage of using the 3Ts model to create superstars. People will pay highly to take them from you. Now, one of the first things that you should do as a leader is understand the pay structure of your team and then meet with your HR department to understand if what they're being paid is appropriate. A long time ago, only employers had access to this kind of information, but now 30 seconds on the internet and your team will know the same thing. Ideally, you don't want them actively looking for another job, so this needs to be addressed. If they are underpaid and you can get them at least the going rate, you will immediately be regarded as someone who will fight for them, and that itself has value. Beyond that, if someone does something that warrants a pay raise, you must fight for that for them. And here's something practical you can do to make that easier. Keep a record. Now, I always do this either in memo form or as a tracker on a spreadsheet. As soon as I learn of something that one of the team does well, I make a detailed note of it. I can all but guarantee that 9 months from now you won't be able to recall the details. You may not even recall the event. But with a brief, detailed record, you can quickly review their achievements and pull out the biggest, backed up with the detail, and present a compelling case to whoever holds the purse strings. Saying, I think Bob deserves an extra 5,000 because he's really good, is not a great sales pitch, but adding specific examples stating why is much more compelling. I think Bob deserves an extra 5,000, and here's why. In February, he managed to reduce inventory by 50,000, and we saved money on our insurance premium
premiums. In March, he got us out of that sticky situation when our contractor went out of business. You'll remember when all of our competitors were failing their customers and we didn't. And in March again, he did that deal that saved us $75,000. And in April, he led that project to improve the delivery performance. Now, KPIs went from 96% to 99%. Now, you may not get everything that you ask for, but your chances of getting something is better if you can demonstrate his worth with a bunch of specific examples. So, keep a record. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. The Beach Boys, and she'll have fun till her daddy takes the T-bird away. Fun. Now, there's a word you don't normally associate with work. Sure, the work needs to get done, but is there any reason you shouldn't enjoy yourself at the same time? I think not. Now, I mentioned way up front the importance of environment, and that's not just providing a comfortable seat and air conditioning, it's the whole experience of working in your team or indeed your company, in both senses of the word, and it should be enjoyable. In the very last section of this course, I'm going to share with you some of the most valuable lessons I've learned over the years from the excellent managers and mentors that I've had. So this is kind of a sneaky peek. For me, it started with Brian, and we'll get to him later. He was the first boss that had allowed us to talk to each other. Now, if I walk into an office and it's quiet, I assume there is something wrong. Your team shouldn't feel the need to fall into a terrified silence when you enter the room. They should be talking, sometimes laughing even. We spend a long time at work, so we may as well make it as enjoyable as possible, right? So, most people are intelligent enough to know that the primary purpose of going to work is to ensure that the work gets done. And in my experience, it's better to trust them to do that. Obviously, if the work isn't getting done, you need to remind them of their priorities. But on the whole, I found it more productive to have a happy team. You, as a manager, are part of that too. You need to be approachable. Your team needs to be able to talk to you comfortably and honestly. By all means, take your job seriously, but you don't have to take yourself that seriously. Getting along shouldn't be hard work. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. Meetings. Now in these next few lectures it's going to be a short series of vignettes about meetings. Now we've covered team meetings in the 3 T's model and interviews just a little while ago, but it's worth taking a little time to talk about meetings in general. And we're going to begin with punctuality. Now you already know that meetings should begin and end on time, but until that discipline is understood, here's something you can do with latecomers. Carry on. Don't stop the meeting to recap for them. No one else wants to sit through it again, and it's startlingly inefficient. If there are 10 people in the room and it takes 5 minutes to get your latecomer up to speed, you've just lost a collective 50 minutes. Instead, remind them that the meeting began 5 minutes ago, and you will catch them up after the meeting has finished. Now, I have known some organisations who will fine people who are late for a meeting. £1 for every minute late, and that money goes into a kitty and it's donated to charity. Everyone's time is incredibly valuable. Respect it. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. What's the point? Seems obvious, but how many meetings have you attended that served no purpose? I once sat in a meeting for 2 hours to discuss what we should discuss at the next meeting. When I pointed this out, my boss said he thought it was important to plan. I think in this instance he was mistaken. We should have planned first. I've known senior managers fill their diaries back to back with meetings for days and weeks ahead, and when anyone accesses their diary, they look terribly busy. But it does beg the question, when do they actually do anything?
If you call a meeting, know and be clear in the invite what the meeting is for, what you want to achieve. If you can't come up with an answer to that question, you probably don't need a meeting. Similarly, if you are invited to a meeting, be sure you understand what the purpose of the meeting is. If there isn't a clear purpose, ask for clarification. If there still isn't one, decline and offer to pick up any action points should anything come out of it. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, welcome back. Who's the decision maker? Now I learned this in a Japanese company. At the very start of a meeting, one particular guy always addressed the room as he walked in, and he asked who the decision maker was, and then he would only speak to them. Now me, I wouldn't be that blunt, but you should establish that the people in attendance have the authority to make a decision should one need to be made. Now I normally cover this off in the invite by stating what the objective is and that a duly authorised person should attend. I also add the catch-all: if I have missed anyone who you feel could add value or should really be involved in this meeting, please forward them a copy of this meeting invite. And that usually covers it. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. Agendas. To give people an idea of what will be discussed in a meeting, it's often useful to provide an agenda. Now this can either be extremely detailed or high level. I've known some people set agenda points by time: 9 o'clock introductions, 9:05 budgets, 9:35 distribution issues, 9:55 closing. Now I tend to keep my agendas very high level and perhaps highlight a few key areas for discussion, just to ensure that we remember to talk about them. Now whichever method works for you is fine, just be sure to communicate some level agenda to the attendees beforehand. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. Minutes. The minutes of a meeting are a written record of who is in attendance and what was discussed. Now normally these will be sent to the attendees and any other interested parties following the meeting to serve as a record and to highlight any action points. Now I am a notoriously bad minute taker, as I prefer to actively participate in the conversation and let it flow naturally, and I struggle with stopping to write something down. So I normally take someone with me who can do it. Now these days most meetings are arranged electronically via Outlook or some other email application, and I find this particularly useful and not only distribute the agenda with the meeting invite, but I also add the minutes to the meeting invite afterwards. That way everyone can find everything all in one place. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay guys, and welcome back. FaceTime. Do you need to go to the meeting? Now perhaps if the subject matter is sensitive or it requires a decision that can only be made at your level, you should be the one in attendance. If not, delegate. Now I know that may sound like a get out, but sometimes it's better to deputise one of your team, particularly if the meeting is about something that they have intricate operational knowledge of. Now this approach has a few upsides. It gives them exposure and raises their profile. It demonstrates your confidence in them. It boosts their confidence and it frees your time. You can always be available for support with any actions that come back. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. You talking to me? Now this is a pet hate of mine. I once recruited an extremely bright young lady by the name of Emily. She was young, 17 or 18 from memory, but despite her years she was very sharp indeed. Now she called a meeting with a supplier and she asked me to sit in. She led the meeting, and during the introductions she introduced me as her manager. Now the guy she invited in was the sales director, probably in his late 40s, early 50s, and every time she asked him a question he immediately immediately turned to me and answered. After the second time, I pointed out to him that this was Emily's meeting and she had asked the question, so his answers should be addressed to her. But to him, I was the ranking officer in the room, and it seemed he didn't want to waste his time with a junior. I found this offensive. I excused myself, but before I left, I let him know that Emily would have the ultimate say in who she awarded the business to, and suggested that he may want to consider being a little bit more respectful. Anyway, personally, I never give my title in a meeting for this very reason. I don't want anyone with a less impressive title being ignored just because there's a bigger badge in the room. I normally just give my name, department, and nothing more. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. If you don't understand, ask. I see this so often it's not even funny. You get a bunch of people in the room, someone says something, everyone nods sagely and the meeting moves on. And after the meeting, people are asking each other, what did that mean? Now, I know that no one likes to be embarrassed, but consider which is more embarrassing. Calling a temporary halt to the meeting to say, sorry, could you explain that to me again, please? I didn't quite follow what you said. Or waiting a few days and then saying, I know I nodded in agreement, but actually I had no idea what you were talking about. Would you mind explaining it to me now? Now, it's funny, to me at least, that how the more senior the person is, the more difficult it seems to be for people to ask them for clarification. Now, I always tell my team, if you don't understand, ask. It's much more efficient. If you take the time to attend a meeting, take the time to understand what's being said. I have no problem with looking foolish and saying that I didn't follow something if it means I get clarification there and then. Many times people have said to me later, I'm glad you asked that because I didn't understand either. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. Common sense? Not that common. Now, how often have you sat in a meeting and listened to a problem being discussed and the solution so obvious pops into your head, something so obvious that everyone must be thinking the same thing, that you didn't say a word, and the meeting moves on and everyone leaves no further forward. Now, this miraculous event is due to the fact that common sense is really not that common. As a general rule of thumb, always state the obvious, as it may not be obvious to everyone, and that may just spark a revolutionary idea. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, and welcome back. How can I help? Now, a long time ago I worked for a guy named Keith, and I probably learned more from him than any other manager I've had before or since. Now, when I started with the company, my boss worked for Keith, but that changed quite quickly and Keith became my manager. And from the stories I'd heard early on from the workforce, having Keith as a boss was not something to be desired. The stories about him were the stuff of legend. He had fired people for no reason, he had an explosive temper, you never spoke to him unless you really had to. He'd even frog marched off a potential huge customer from the site and told them never to come back. So the stories went. Now, through careful study, everyone in the building had worked out a system to tell if you could or couldn't talk to him on any particular day. Now, he was a short guy, and if you heard him walking down the corridor and his footsteps were quick, you didn't talk to him. Slowly, and you were probably safe. The consensus was that his mood could be judged in direct proportion to the speed at which he walked. The faster he walked, the worse his mood. Now, one day I'd made a mistake. I had not ordered something and production would be affected. Now, there was no way I could hide it, so I just had to fess up to Keith. Now, my colleagues told me that I was going to get fired and they wished me luck for the future, which really helped. So I took the long walk down the corridor to Keith's office. I knocked on the door and I asked his secretary if I could see him. She called through and told me to go right in. That was it. the end of my career. Now he asked me to sit down and he asked how he could help, and I thought that was a curious thing to say. How can I help? Perhaps that was just something he said to people to lull them into a full sense of security before he pounced. But the moment of truth had come. I told him that I had missed something, and the result was that it would affect production a few days later. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me for the longest time. And then he spoke. He asked me which line it affected, so I told him, and this was agony. Then he continued, "Okay, call Robert Easypack and ask him to send some down. I was up at his factory on Monday and he's got a dozen pallets in the warehouse. He'll be able to get some here for tomorrow." My throat was dry, but I said okay. Then he asked how was it that I'd missed it, and I explained, and then he said I should create a checklist of things to do in order of criticality, and then tick them off each day. That way we would know that everything had been done. Now I was still sitting there waiting for the apprentice finger and the words, "You're fired," but it never came. And he asked me if there was anything else. I said no, and he thanked me. He thanked me. So I walked back down to the general office and my colleagues were silent. They asked if I was going to clear my desk, and I said I'm going to call Robert Easypack, and that's exactly what I did. Now I asked Keith about this years later. Actually it came up in a conversation. He wanted to know why very few people told him the truth, and I said that the general opinion was that he had a temper and most everyone was scared of him. And he said that he only lost his temper when people tried to hide mistakes from him, and he found out when it was too late to do anything about them. If people just came to him immediately, there was probably still something that could be done, and he would rather people just be honest. And that's what happened with me. Had I not told him of my mistake when I did, it may have been too late to solve it, and I possibly would have been fired. But by confessing in a timely manner, the disaster was avoided. Now most problems can be solved, but you may not always have access to the solution to the problem yourself. Keith knew what Rob had in his warehouse, and that was a connection that I could never have made. Everyone makes mistakes from time to time. Pokey-okey your processes where you can, but encourage people to be open, honest and timely. It's easier to solve problems that way. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. The whirlwind. Now, one of the best qualities in a leader is the ability to stay calm in times of crisis. Equally as good is not to cause a crisis when there isn't one. A number of years ago, I had a boss we called the whirlwind. Everything was urgent. Everything had to be done immediately. Everything had to be done first. Whenever he was on holiday or out of the office for a few days, everything got done and the team were happy and relaxed, which suggested to me that everyone knew what they were doing and the work always got done, if he wasn't there. Now one day he received an email from one of the directors asking about a particular project that I'd been working on, and he was stressed. "I need a complete chronology, everything from the time we took the project on up to now. I want the times and dates of every phone call, every meeting, who was there, what was discussed, who should have been doing what, who is holding anything up, and I need it by lunchtime." Now, that's an awful lot of work. Now sure, we would have an email trail, but to go through them all and create a summarized chronology would take more than a few minutes. And phone calls, who can remember the dates and times of those? Solicitors, maybe, but certainly not me. I asked what the question was he was trying to answer, but he said he wanted to be armed with every possible fact and figure so we couldn't be blamed. I asked him what it was that we were being blamed for, but he said I shouldn't be spending time asking questions, I should be putting the list together. So I did. It took me a day and a half and I fell behind with all the other work that I had to do. He wasn't pleased with me. Now a few weeks later his boss returned to work after a few months working at one of our other sites in Japan. And he introduced himself and he asked how I was finding working there. I said that there was lots of firefighting and we seemed to bounce from crisis to crisis and be in a constant state of chaos. He asked me for an example. Now I told him about the project and the timeline that I had to drop everything to put together, all the calls, all the emails, the meeting, who was there, etc. He wanted to know who had asked for that, so I explained that Pete,
my boss, had had an email from a director about the project and I had to put the list together, priority one. He asked me when that was and I said it was a couple of weeks ago. Then he said, I'm the director. Now, I did a quick mental rerun of everything that I just said to make sure that I hadn't dropped my boss in the mire, and I was moderately sure I had recounted the facts that they'd happened. I figured I was on safe ground, so I ventured to ask him what the problem had been. No problem, I just asked Pete if we could have a catch-up when I got back so I knew where we were, he said. So I explained that I didn't understand why there was such an urgency to get the list compiled by that lunchtime a few weeks earlier, and in honesty, he was wondering the same thing. Now it turns out that neatly piled on Pete's desk were dozens of such urgent reports, just sitting there waiting for someone to ask him a question about. Now some would be needed eventually and some never would, but he liked to be prepared, just in case. Now the cost of that was the immense amount of pressure he put on his team. We were working to the Pete deadline, not the real deadline, if there was a deadline at all. Sometimes there are crises and you will need all hands to the pump to address them, but it's important to give your team the facts. Don't say the deadline is today if it's actually next week. And above all, make sure before you embark on dealing with the crisis that there actually is one. The whirlwind should never be the constant state for you or your team. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. If you can't change the culture, okay, and welcome back. Now in one organisation I managed a few disparate teams across several locations, and I had a couple of staff who were known to take frequent extra holidays, sick days, when they weren't actually sick, a problem that needed to be addressed. Now following yet another absence from one individual, his supervisor came to me and said he didn't know what to do. The guy had been off work for 3 days, but yesterday several staff had seen him sitting outside the pub at lunchtime having a few beers with his friends. His supervisor called him on his mobile there and then, and the employee told him that he had been laid up in bed with a stomach bug, even though his supervisor had said he had seen him at the pub. Now he'd spoken to the guy about it in the past and he'd told him that he had to stop taking sick days when he wasn't sick or there would be consequences. Even my boss had had the same conversation with him several times. It made no difference. This had been going on for 3 years. Now I said I would talk to the guy when he returned to work and invited the supervisor to attend the meeting. I got a hold of the employee's personnel file and I could see that his absence was through the roof. I checked with HR and I asked them what courses of action were available to me, given that the person in question had received so many warnings in the past. They told me that given the case history I could move straight to final written warning, which meant if he did it again he could be legitimately dismissed. As an aside, what I was looking to achieve here was to have the issue resolved, and the issue wasn't the employee. The real issue was that we had a role that needed fulfilling and we needed a full-time employee to fulfill it, which probably is thing manager thinking. It wasn't personal. There were 2 possible outcomes. The employee would come into work when he should and do his job, or he would be dismissed and someone else would. Either option fixed the problem. Now, anyway, always engage your human resources department in these circumstances as they are there to advise you on your company policies and procedures. Ultimately, they are there to keep you out of court. When he returned to work looking very healthy and suntanned, I invited him to a return to work interview in line with the company's policies and procedures, and he was perfectly relaxed about it, smug even. I went through the policies and procedures and I discussed his absence record and also said that he had been seen enjoying the afternoon sun at the pub around the corner from work. He wasn't the slightest bit concerned, even when I said that I was issuing a final written warning and that unless his sickness record improved immediately and significantly, it could result in him being dismissed. He actually looked bored. Anyway, He stood to leave and I explained that I knew that he had had the same conversation many times before with other managers, but this was the first time that he'd had it with me and I wouldn't be having it again. Still, no concern. A few weeks later the rugby was on the TV and true to form our guy was off work again the first time England played. Again round the pub with his mates watching the game on the big screen. When he returned to work I gave him the required 2 days notice to appear at a meeting with HR and myself, and in that meeting he was dismissed. A strange thing happened as a result of that dismissal. I had another 4 or 5 people in my various teams who, though not as bad, regularly took sick days for no legitimate reason. As soon as the word got around about what had happened, which was very quickly indeed, it stopped immediately. There had been a culture of having days off if you didn't fancy working, and despite going through the motions of the return to work process and clear statements of what could happen if the situation didn't improve, nothing changed. And that's because the managers had not been true to their word. They had issued threats, for want of a better word, but never delivered on them. So the workforce did what they wanted. It was a cultural issue. Now, a long time ago, one CEO told me, if you can't change the culture, change the people. And you don't have to change that many before the message hits home. Now, as a disclaimer, I have no issue with time off for legitimate reasons, and you should always consult with your human resources department for their guidance in these situations. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Good morning, or what I learnt from Bill. Now, way back at the start of my career when I was in my late teens, that is, a quiet, shy, young and impressionable young man, I met my first truly inspiring leader, a Scottish gentleman by the name of Bill. I mentioned him earlier. Now, everyone loved and respected Bill. One-on-one, he was a softly spoken, thoughtful man, but he did one thing that really stood out to me, and this was the first time I'd seen something and thought, I wish I could do that. Now, every morning when he came into the general office where I worked along with about a dozen other people, he said a really enthusiastic, "Good morning." That's my best Bill impression. And he said this to everyone. He always had a smile on his face, which at that age I put down to the fact that he was the boss and he had a really nice BMW 3 Series. It turns out it's just the way he was. Now, he would do this even if he didn't need to speak to anyone about anything. He just took a minute out of his day as soon as everyone had arrived to come in and say good morning. And if he had to speak to anyone specifically, he would address them personally. "Good morning, Alan. How are you today?" Another brilliant Bill impression. Then he would wait for your answer. The guy actually cared. I thought that was amazing. This guy who earned so much money and drove that really cool BMW 3 Series wanted to know how I was. And in honesty, when he asked you that, you were great. As I said, at that age I was very quiet and shy, a young kid in a working world with serious grown-ups, but immediately I felt at ease. When I moved to a different company, I did what Bill did. I went into people's offices and I said good morning to everyone, and I found that people responded. And that's the great thing about changing jobs. You can reinvent yourself. No one there knows you, so you can be anything you want. And I wanted to be Bill. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. That won't happen with me. Or another thing I learned from Bill. Now, just before I started work at that company working for Bill, I went on holiday and I decided to take an extra week. The joys of being young. Now, I wasn't due to start work for another week, so I figured no harm done. Little did I know that the agency who got me the interview had told me the wrong start date. I should have started my new job 1 week earlier. Now, the agency realised their mistake when they got a call from Bill on Monday morning asking where I was, but I was nowhere to be found. No mobile phones or email back then. Now, obviously, this was not a great start to my new job, and Bill called me into his office as soon as I walked in on my first day. He said he was expecting me a week ago and that no one, including the agency or my own mother,
could find me. Now at that time neither of us knew that the agency had given me the wrong start date, and they certainly hadn't admitted it. Bill said, "So we're clear that not turning up for work won't happen with me. You get one chance and you've used it. Come to work when you should and we'll not speak about it again." I hadn't been in the door 15 minutes and I was already in trouble. Then he took me to meet the people I was going to work with, as happy as you like. Half an hour later he called me back into his office. I thought, this is it, I'm going to get fired. And he'd said he'd had a call from the agency and that they told him they'd given me the wrong start date. "I owe you an apology. I'm sorry. I didn't know that they had told you to start today. I've read them the Riot Act and you should have told me when you were in here earlier." "But you're the boss," I said. And he said, "Bosses can be wrong too." So in the first half an hour of my employment I learned two important things. Sometimes as a manager there are times when you have to say what needs to be said, even if it's not pleasant. Now I imagine that Bill took no more pleasure in telling me off than I took in being told off, particularly as I had no idea why at the time. But he had laid the ground rules clearly. There was no misunderstanding between us, and I had no doubt that I had indeed had my one chance. And the other thing is, just because you're the boss, it doesn't mean you're always right. And if you're wrong, admit it and apologise. People will respect you more for it. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Meet our new rising star, or yet another thing I learned from Bill. Now I learned another great thing from Bill. That's his real name, by the way. The value of value and being pre-sold. Now shortly after I joined that company there was a catastrophe. They ran out of twine to stitch up the bags on our cornflour line. It was a well-known food company. Now no production meant no sales, and no sales meant no profit. All of the experienced people had called every supplier in the food industry, but no one had any we could buy. Now a few years earlier my best friend worked in a glue factory, and I'd visit him one lunchtime just to shoot the breeze. And I remember he was stitching bags of glue. So I called his company and I asked for the purchasing department and got through to the lady who bought the twine that he'd been using. So she gave me the supplier's phone number. I called them to get the specification. They were not a supplier to the food industry, but how different could twine be, right? So I took the specification to our quality team. They gave it the go-ahead, and I went to Bill and I told him that I could get it there that afternoon, and he looked amazed. "We've tried every supplier in the market. Where's it coming from?" he asked, in a Scottish accent obviously, because he was a Scottish man. Now, I told him about this visit I'd had with my buddy at the glue factory and how I'd made the connection and that quality had already okayed the spec. You see, the thing is that we'd tried everyone we knew, but we hadn't tried everyone that other people knew. The twine arrived and production resumed. Now, Bill had been summoned to the MD's office to update him on the situation, and Bill asked me to join him. Meet our new rising star. That's how he introduced me, and then he recounted how the problem had been solved. Now I felt great. Not only did my boss introduce me as a rising star, which is a massive confidence boost, but he had already pre-sold me to his boss. And if Bill thought you were a star, everyone thought you were a star. Being valued is a great thing, and having someone sell you that way is even better. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you, or one I learned from Kevin. Okay, and welcome back. Now I picked this simple one up from Kevin. That's his real name, by the way. At the end of the day, he either came into the office or he opened the door to his office, which was near the exit, and as everyone left, he thanked them for their work that day. Now it doesn't cost anything, and it shows that he appreciated the work his team had done. I like that. I was one of his team and I wanted to do a good job for him. Now, I was grateful that he took the time out each day to thank me, but not everyone had the same view. Some thought that he was just going through the motions. He said it whether he meant it or not. To me, he took the time out of his day to say it, and that was one of the most important things, and that was more than some of the other managers did. I chose to believe he meant it. Now, I know that some people say things because they feel they have to, and it can come across as insincere. I'm always mindful that my teams may feel the same way about me, so I blend two approaches, both of which I stole from others, obviously. When one of my team does anything noteworthy or takes me through something or anything outside of what they do day to day, I always thank them personally. Remember, I mentioned this at the very beginning of the course. And my second approach, I think, combats this possibility of my thank yous becoming perfunctory, and we'll get to that next. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. I don't do half days, or what I learned from Keith. Now, in an American company, I worked for the director of operations, a man named Keith. He was a hands-on, sleeves rolled up engineer and process guy through and through, and I probably learnt more from him than anyone else in my career. I was brought in to troubleshoot their procurement function initially, but that developed into troubleshooting the wider supply chain and ultimately became a turnaround project. The site was making a loss, but there was no reason that they shouldn't be making a profit. Now, I've mentioned Keith before. He was the guy who first told me that people don't fail, processes fail, and he taught me the value of flexibility. I once needed a half day's holiday, I can't remember why, but I filled in my holiday form and I left it on his desk. Now, he called me in when he saw it and he asked me what it was. I said I needed to take a half day's leave one of the afternoons the following week, and then he proceeded to screw up my request and throw it in the bin. I guess I wasn't having that half a day after all. He told me he didn't do half days. If I needed to take half a day, just let him know and take the half a day. He explained, there are times when I will need you to work late or come in early, and I would hope that you would do that for me. I can't pay you overtime, but I can be flexible, so don't bother using up your holidays with half a days. You can be sure that I worked my backside off for Keith. People have lives outside of work, and from time to time the 9 to 5 just doesn't fit. Be flexible with your team and they will more than repay you for it. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. Cakes on a Friday, or what I learned from Brian. In one job I had a long time ago, our manager got a new manager. Now, our manager was autocratic. If something went well, she was straight in front of the boss explaining how it was her. If something went wrong, she was straight in front of the boss explaining how one of her team was incompetent. Not a great atmosphere, but on a positive note, I did learn never to do that myself. So, my boss's new boss, a guy named Brian, another Scottish fellow. He walked into the general office about 10 to midday on a Friday and asked if anyone was going to the shop for lunch. We had a supermarket just down the road. Now, Annette said that she was, and he gave her £5, which was an awful lot of money back in the day, and he asked her if she would bring back some cakes for everyone, so we just assumed it was his birthday. Now, when she got back, she gave him the cakes, and he put them on an empty desk and told everyone to help themselves. We all tucked in, and Annette said, "Happy birthday, Brian." Now, he laughed and he explained that it wasn't his birthday. So, why the cakes? He said that he appreciated all the work we did, but sometimes he would forget to thank us. Not because he wasn't grateful, but sometimes he was busy, or he missed us because he was in a meeting, for any number of reasons, but he didn't want us to think that our efforts went unnoticed. So, on a Friday, we would have cakes, and that was his way of thanking us for the work that we'd done. Now, I thought that this was great, and I vowed if I was ever the boss and rich enough, I would do that too. Now, I always tell my teams the story I've just told you, why I do it, and that I stole the idea from Brian. Putting your hand in your own pocket as a thank you is different to a thank you from the company. It's personal. It's you thanking them. And I am truly thankful to all the people I've managed. It's them that make me look good to my boss. Now, in the scheme of things, it doesn't cost a fortune, and it brings everyone together for a quiet 10 minutes away from the hustle and the bustle of the day job. It's like a mini social event where everyone, including the boss, can have a little downtime and be people together. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture. You're allowed to talk to each other, you know. or another thing I learned from Brian. Okay, and welcome back. Now this was revolutionary to us at the time. As I mentioned, our boss was very old school. Come in, shut up, work hard, go home. That's what she wanted from us, and we were too scared to do anything else. It's all we knew. That was until Brian became her boss. We were busily working, and as is inevitable when humans get together, we started talking to each other. Some work stuff, some not work stuff, some banter, a bit of laughter. And then Brian walked in, and we knew we'd been caught. We fell silent, just waiting for the reprimand. Now, he stood in the doorway looking at each of us, and then he went over to Christine and asked whatever it was he'd come in to ask. And we were all just looking at each other like kids who'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Then Brian finished with Christine and walked out. And then he came back a second later, and he said, "You're allowed to talk to each other, you know." And then he left. And Brian was right. This was not Victorian boarding school. We were grown-ups, for the most part, at work. He recognised that the work was being done, so why not talk? That made us all a lot happier. And you know what they say about happy workers? Good workers. Now, I must tell you about my dear friend Emmy Lou. She looked after a particularly demanding department for me a few years back. I walked into the general office as she was ranting about how difficult they were to deal with. I told her to get all of her work done and then moan because it was more efficient. She followed me into my office and said, "Actually, I complain about them while I'm working, and that's even more efficient still." You can't argue with logic. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture.